What? Oh, yeah. Shoot. I'm not muted. I'm not muted right now. All right. Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. I'd like to welcome you to Next, Beyond the Metaverse. One thing I think we've realized as we are looking at the global way we connect with this technology is the importance of maybe looking at a new time zone, maybe the Metaverse time zone, so that we can all be together at the same time. As you can tell, I'm not Kent By, but I'd like to start off the event by acknowledging that Lethbridge College is proud to be located on the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy. I want to thank you for joining us today as we take some time throughout the day to learn together about the Metaverse and what this is going to mean for organizations and businesses going forward here. We've brought leaders from different organizations and companies around the world, including Microsoft, Unity, Viacom CBS, Ubisoft, and more, to help you and your organizations really start to understand the implications of this new computing revolution and to start to prepare for it. I'd like to thank our sponsors for the event here, the Regional Innovation Network of Southern Alberta, or RINSA, and Alberta Innovates for their support for this event to make it happen. It's clear by the registration numbers, by the activity happening in the chat, that there's a lot of excitement and interest in what this means for all of us as individuals and as organizations. And I'm looking forward to participating in those chats with you all today and learning from our speakers. We got a great lineup of speakers prepared to share their insights with what they think this is going to mean for us. I also make sure to draw a point to some of the great giveaways that we've got available throughout the day. Information about those giveaways are in the chat. What we really want to be able to do is provide through these giveaways an opportunity for people to not just experience immersive technologies, but also be able to start creating for it. So take a look in the chat and take advantage of those opportunities for a chance to win these great prizes. So I want to talk a little bit about this metaverse, this concept that we've heard a lot about, and a lot of us have ideas, a lot of us are confused. That's why we're all here to really kind of talk about this. The metaverse, and an analogy that I like to use is that we're really on the cusp of a new computing revolution, and I compare it a lot to where we were in the early 90s with the launch of the internet. Back then, it was not what we have today. Very static content, very archaic kind of technology that has evolved over the time. And at the time when the internet was launched, there was a lot of naysayers, a lot of people that thought there was going to be a fad and going to fizzle out, not going to really be an effective way to communicate. People didn't understand how we were and why we'd want to replace existing technologies like the radio, the television, the telephone, etc. But as we can see today, since we're all actually communicating and connecting together through the internet and the World Wide Web, it really has become a staple of not just businesses, but society. And we're on something again with that, with regards to the metaverse and our immersive technologies. And the metaverse is not just VR, it's not just AR, those are access points. It's really looking at a way that we connect together, a way that we can visualize data, a way that we can learn and access information that's different than what we have today. And it's really exciting time to see the interest in this technology, the interest in creating, the interest in accessing. And there's a lot of pros and cons to this technology. We're going to learn about those pros and cons today through our different keynote speakers I'm really excited to learn from them, just like you are excited to learn from them as you're here. The metaverse really is something that, is, whether we view it as it's here or it's coming, the reality is it is going to change how we communicate and how we work together. And whether we knew it or not, Lethbridge College was preparing potential developers for this new platform as we launched our virtual and augmented reality certificate program a few years ago. And really, the creators are going to be a critical piece in populating the metaverse in whatever form that takes and whatever form that looks like. If you can imagine the internet with no web pages, with no apps, with no social media, with no content, it would be a barren wasteland where people wouldn't be participating. And so the need for content is going to be an absolute critical piece for whatever the metaverse looks like. And we're excited to be able to help contribute to that pool of talent through our program. And there are lots of opportunities for being able to learn and create. We've got some great, like I said earlier, we've got some great speakers from Microsoft and from Unity who are, technology providers and create tools that can help creators be able to create new content. And so I think that's an important thing to consider as we're going throughout the day is, how can I start creating, right? There are a lot of free apps available. There are a lot of tools available that you can access to start creating content. And even though, the metaverse may not be here for a few years and maybe it's here, we'll find out today. The need to start creating is an important thing. Rather than be reactionary, be proactive, right? If you imagine, again, going back to the analogy of the internet and what that meant for businesses, as businesses started realizing that this is a way to not just communicate, but to sell and to complete transactions, a lot of companies really scrambled to get content together. And I remember, because I was around at that time, if I'm dating myself, that early internet pages, web pages, were really just a brochure copied over onto their website because they didn't understand and they were being reactionary. You have a chance, since you're here at this conference, to start to prepare your organization now to be able to have content ready when the metaverse becomes more of a mainstream thing. And even if it isn't mainstream right now, there are chances and opportunities for you to contribute into that immersive content and that spatial content through virtual and augmented reality, through digital twins, which we're going to learn about, and through a lot of different kind of ways that you can do that. You can do that now, even if we don't have the metaverse as people are envisioning it. Don't wait till it's here to start creating. Start creating today. There's a lot of things that as I grew up with the internet, I remember the evolution that it has seen. And if we look from day one in the early 90s, when we had kind of the commercial or consumer access to the internet to where we are today, many years later, it's night and day, right? And if we look at kind of where we are now with our immersive technologies, we're at that beginning point. But in the next few years, we're going to see massive changes in how we create, consume, and connect, right? There's lots of talk of different devices coming from providers, and it's that access that's going to really skyrocket not just adoption, but demand for immersive and spatial technologies and spatial content. Again, you think about the internet and how we used to access it, and we still do, but a lot of countries don't access it primarily this way, through desktop computers. It's really accessed a lot through our smartphone devices. It's that access that's the critical piece that saw this huge adoption of web content. And that's what we're going to see as access improves to spatial content through different devices that are rumored to be coming. We're going to see a huge demand, not only in access, but in wanting to create. So again, that is coming. And I think if we take anything away from this conference, it's to be prepared for when that does happen, so that we're not scrambling as organizations and as consumers to be able to create and consume the spatial content. It's a great opportunity today at the conference to be able to get insights. I encourage you to engage with folks in the chat, engage with folks in the networking opportunities that we've got planned throughout the day. We've got one in Classy Live, and we also have one in AltSpace VR, where you'll have a chance to kind of connect with industry folks in Alberta as well as each other. So I do encourage you to take that opportunity to connect and to learn, to make notes, to write questions down that you can either follow up afterwards or to ask folks during these opportunities. Use this time to learn together. And I'm really excited to see those questions, to ask questions myself, because that's the one thing that I view is that all of us are in this journey together. And whether you have been developing immersive content for one day or 10 years, we all have an opportunity to learn together. And I think it's a really exciting thing. And I'm super pumped to see the conversations and to see all the registrations, because this is something that is clear that we need. And I'm happy that Lethbridge College can help support by bringing us all together to learn together. I think the metaverse is, and again, that word is sometimes overused, and sometimes um, I think about that word and think, what does it really mean? And really, it's really about a computing revolution. It's about a new way of accessing information, a new way of connecting. And so if you cringe when you say the word metaverse, that's okay, because it stands for something more. It's a word that's kind of been stamped on the current technology, but it stands for something more. It stands for connecting and communicating and creating together. And I'm really excited to be able to be a part of that and to help you be a part of that. Oh, wait, awesome. Kent,
hello, everybody.
Welcome. All right, I'm going to hop off and let Kent finish off here. Thank you, Kent.
Yes. Sorry for being a little bit late. I had the wrong time in my calendar. Time zone issues. Hello, everybody.
Well, that's why we need Metaverse time zone, I think. But anyway, I'll let you take it away. Go for it, Kent. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us here today. There's a lot of talk that's been happening around the quote unquote metaverse, and is it going to be something that's overly hyped and something that's not actually going to be viable? Is it just an idea that has been co-opted by other factions of the XR industry, whether it's the crypto folks? For me, when I think about the metaverse, I think it's certainly an aspirational task to see like where this might go in the future with something that's open, interoperable, taking the affordances of immersive technologies that provide you a variety of different qualities of presence, whether that's active presence to be able to express your agency, or mental and social presence of creating these worlds that feel believable and that are stimulating your mind and give you the sense that you're with other people, the sense of emotional presence of really giving you engaged into these experiences. And then finally, the embodied and environmental presence. That's where you feel like you're actually immersed within these virtual worlds and that it feels real because your sensory experiences are telling you that it's just as genuine or real or other experiences that you've had. So I feel like there's those qualities of presence that we have within the immersive technologies, certainly with virtual reality and augmented reality. But as we start to have that into this shift that's happening in the industry, that may actually take 5 to 10 to 20 years to do the design from 2D to 3D to make things from more static print-based things that you consume, these objects, into these more immersive, interactive worlds that feel like they're really visceral, really real. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about that recently. Just finished up another talk for Gatherverse that dives into my own ideas of the metaverse and a framework for kind of understanding it. But at the heart of it, it's taking what we all know if you're in the XR industry about the affordances of virtual and augmented reality, and then expanding that out into with the open web, with what's happening on WebXR, with OpenXR, with these open standards that start to move beyond just the walled garden of, say, Unity or Unreal Engine, and more into these interoperable places that are going to be able to go from one place to the next, just like we are online. Now, how all those different things change in terms of going from those paradigms from 2D to 3D, I think is still a big open question. And there's certainly a lot of open questions when it comes to ethics and everything else in terms of the industry verticals that is going to be beneficial for. Because if anybody's been in VR chat, you know that being in private instances is a lot more enjoyable than being in public instances, especially if you're trying to connect with people that you already know. But you also don't want to eliminate the possibility of meeting new people in these public online spaces. So kind of like the public commons. So when we think about the open web, you don't usually have those dynamics of private versus public. I mean, sometimes you do with when you log into these different websites, like social media, as an example, where you have a different experience that's tailored towards you. But I think to what degree do you want to have an embodiment and have other interactions with other people? And taking those metaphors of the 2D to 3D, I think are going to be a lot of things in terms of what is public, what is private, as we start to think about the metaverse in the future. So that's just like, I guess, some of my context setting thoughts about the metaverse. And I guess I'll hand it back to the showrunners to see like what the timing is for the next thing. Just because I need to get that in front of me just to know what's coming up next. But I'll hand it back to the other creators here to see where to go next with this gathering today that I'm really excited to participate in throughout the course of the day. Um, so I'll have to. So, oh, I still have 15 minutes. Okay, great. Maybe let me share some slides then, since I didn't know how much time I had. Um, so let me pull up a presentation that I was talking about, and I'll just give some slides and kind of talk about the metaverse for another 15 minutes. Um, so hold on one second. Let me just pull up the. Okay, here we go. Um, Okay, so let me present here, slideshow. And okay, let me go back. Oops, StreamYard. Let me know if this works once I get it. Share screen. Okay, share screen. Okay, window, Chrome tab, Metaverse. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Let me just double check. Okay, I see it there. Okay. Let me go back. Okay, so I think I just wanted to walk through some of the ways that other people are thinking about the metaverse as a maybe a context setting to see what are some different things that we can start to think about how to think about the metaverse. So Tim Sweeney says it's a real-time 3D social medium where people can create, engage, and shared experience as equal participants in an economy with social impact. And so the Unreal Engine and Tim Sweeney and what Epic is doing with the metaverse, I really appreciate. And there's a lot of focus also on open standards as well, and their approach. And I think he's also really thinking about like programming languages and everything else. Matthew Ball has obviously been doing a lot of essays about the metaverse, and so he has a definition that I think is pretty good as well. He says that the metaverse is a massively scaled and interoperable network of real-time rendered 3D virtual worlds, which can be experienced synchronously and persistently in an effectively unlimited number of users with an individual sense of presence, with the continuity of data, such as identity, history, entitlements, objects, communications, and payments. So, as we look at his framework for the metaverse, it's having lots of different things from the compute networking. And I wanted to just give a little bit of my own meta framework that I make sense of the metaverse so that when you look at some of these other approaches from companies and other, I guess, thinkers about the metaverse, you start to organize in your own mind how everything kind of fits together as we start to move into this new, phase. So I'm a big fan of Lessig's pathetic dot theory, where he talks about the cultural norms, the law, the market dynamics, and the technological architecture and the code. And those are all feeding back into the user. And from Lessig's approach, these are all independent entities. But I think that another way of thinking about it is saying that there's a nested context where there's actually a little bit of a hierarchy between what is the broadest context. And so, just as an example, the broadest context is the earth. We all live on the earth. And there's people on the earth that form a culture. And then within the context of that culture, you have the laws from the laws that are driving the economy, and then the design guidelines, and then the network architecture, XR hardware, operating system and code, app code, and then user experience. And so when you put all these out together, then you have a little bit of a tech stack that goes all the way down to the earth into these larger sociological aspects of the culture, the laws, and the economy. And you get into more of ethical frameworks that are kind of in that soft law area that are informing the hardware, but not necessarily implemented by the tech stack that goes from the network architecture on up. So this is a way that I've found to be helpful when thinking about the metaverse because you're starting to pull in aspects of a virtual economy with different things are more driven by culture. So you need moderation, but you can't just technologically solve everything through engineering. So there are things that are coming in from these larger scales, especially the laws in terms of what needs to pass from not only the laws that are set by these individual companies and the virtual worlds that they have their own rules and laws, or code of conduct, which is maybe the more soft law version. But you also have the laws that are passed within the companies or within the states, like so, in the United States, there's a privacy law that the companies in that country has to follow. So there's things like privacy that needs to be passed at the level of these local jurisdictions. That then impacts, like say GDPR impacts what is happening within these tech companies. So if we go back to Matthew Ball's framework, then we can start to spread things out in terms of the economy and the payment services, the network architecture with the XR hardware, and the compute is sort of in between those things. Virtual platforms, and then the content services and assets in terms of the content, and then design guidelines is sort of the interchange tools and standards. But this is just, I guess, one way to start to break down this larger framework and see that okay, well, there's things that may be missing in terms of the impact of the laws, or if it's in right relationship to the earth, or other things like do we have the ability to talk about ethics? Like, how does the ethical framework fit into Matthew Ball's framework here? And it doesn't seem to have a clear entry point into where that would be, except for maybe the tools and standards. But ethics is a lot broader than just the hardware specs. Um, Tony Parisi has the 7 rules of the metaverse, where he's going in and taking aspects of the open web. And so if we port that over, there's things that are open, interoperable, decentralized control. It's basically a network, and then it's hardware independent and it's for everyone. We have the HTC, who talks a lot about different aspects of the 3D, the 2D versus 3D. So we have different things from the user experience and apps going from 2D into the 3D. We have the XR hardware that's a part of that that gives a new spatial affordances, and then the economy as well. Mark Zuckerberg and Meta has talked about interoperability, which I'm really happy to see. And then they've got a number of different aspects of the metaverse in terms of presence and avatars. So we break that out. There's virtual goods, and the design guidelines of privacy, safety, interoperability. Meta has their own definition of privacy that I think is from 1973 in terms of the Fair Information Practice Principles, where their idea of privacy is that it's private if they disclose to you what they're going to do. But I don't know if that's necessarily actually protecting people's privacy. So their definition of privacy, I think, is debatable in terms of how they define it. They're saying that they have a design guideline of privacy, but that's just in the context of how they have everything set up. So they're obviously building XR hardware, and they have a sense of presence is a huge part that I mentioned before. The mental social presence and active presence and uh, embodied environmental presence, emotional presence, all these qualities of presence that are qualitatively different than what you get before. Um, Roblox has their own way of thinking about the metaverse, and that they have this wave that kind of spread out. They do have an economy, which is worth pointing out. And they have anywhere, which is interesting to see. Like, they want to have Roblox anywhere. I don't know if that means augmented reality or what exactly they mean by anywhere. Um, but that gives you a sense. Microsoft, when you look at how they're approaching the metaverse, is essentially a lot of things that are in this network architecture layer, where a lot of their focus has been on Azure and Azure Cloud. So everything is basically driven by having Azure services. So HoloLens having lots of different things that are feeding back into this network architecture, that they're all the services that they want to try to create. And most of their focus has been enterprise. They do have different things like AltSpace VR or Minecraft and all their gaming, but they didn't actually mention much of that at all at the Ignite 2021, which is more of an enterprise focus. And some of their stuff that even they're mentioning up here in terms of their metaverse apps aren't fully even integrated yet. Most of it's coming from AltSpace as at this point. Then you have Niantic. They call the metaverse a dystopian nightmare, and that they make this contrast between AR and VR, and that they have a real world metaverse that they're going for. And that, to me, that's creating a little bit of a false bifurcation between the virtual and the real, and saying that just because things are in a virtual mediated space doesn't mean it's less genuine or real than things that are happening in the meat space. So, but they've taken the tact of kind of calling the metaverse dystopian and VR, and kind of having this contrast between VR and AR. Where for me, I think they're more working together. But I can understand why they might take that approach, because there is something different when it comes to when you're meeting in physical space. So real time mapping, and so a lot of their stuff is around these different real time mapping and understanding of the environment that could arguably be in the network architecture layer here. Um, and building the world together. Jasmine Roberts, for anybody who's an engineer, she's got a lot of these mapping out into the different layers from mostly the tech stack of the engines, protocols, backend, databases, SDK. So for anybody who is thinking about the different platforms and the different SDKs and APIs and whatnot, this is a good visualization that she has created. And again, this is the network architecture protocols, and mostly it's around the operating system, apps, and context. Um, Swati Bhatia had this just another way of trying to understand the metaverse stack. So we have all of this here, and I'll be posting these slides later for anybody that wants to do a deep dive, and I'll also have a Twitter thread that goes into this a little bit. XRSI, XR Safety Initiative, has their anatomy of the metaverse where they have lots of these different layers. This is probably one of the more comprehensive visions. And they're saying at each one of these layers is these other ethical aspects of diversity and inclusion, accessibility, identity protection, privacy, anonymity, safety, security, ethics, and standards that need to be at each of these different layers. Um, but this is just another way. And you can see that that's kind of fleshed out more in terms of really thinking about the full range of different aspects of the metaverse. Coinbase, so the crypto is worth mentioning in terms of what they're thinking about for the metaverse. It has a lot of aspects of the economy layer for different ways of doing value exchange in virtual economies. For me personally, I'm a little bit more skeptical lately around crypto and NFTs in terms of their engineering flaws and being susceptible to civil attacks. So basically being taken over and replicating a lot of aspects of having a small handful of people control what is happening. So if you look at the crypto, if the mining and who controls the mining, it's basically this replication of different aspects of capitalism and centralization. So how decentralized can it actually be with the economic incentives that are there already? So that's I'm overall pretty skeptical, but there's other aspects of identity that I think may be a part of the crypto sort of self-sovereign identity aspect of having cryptographically secured identity aspects in these virtual worlds, and pretty standard other things. Regulatory frameworks is also worth calling out in terms of at least it's good to see that the crypto community realizes that they need to have a lot more regulations to be viable. Um, Avibar Zaev has a lot of ways of seeing how the metaverse is going through these different layers and levels across all these things, and how there's a progression across the spatial metaphors, the people avatars, artifacts, and context, privacy, and monetization. First presented this at AWE of 2021. So again, it's really focusing actually on the user experience of the different qualities of presence, environmental presence, embodied presence, social presence, emotional, mental presence, and active presence. One of the few metaverse frameworks that really dives into the experiential aspect of XR, um, and also privacy monetization in there as well, and context. And then just to finally, just a couple of other ones, John Radoff, domains of interoperability for the metaverse. Going into all these different aspects of the metaverse. Here again, just another framework. And then the Christopher Lafayette saying the seven standards of the metaverse. There was a lot of talk about the tech specifications around the metaverse, but not a lot of aspects of the ethical implications. And so Christopher Lafayette tried to take an approach of saying not only the ethical aspects, but some of the contextual domains. So the education. So there's the context of education and wellness programs. So medicine and education as a part of the apps and experiences that they're focusing on the Gatherverse, which is coming up on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. It's a free gathering. And then some of the more design guidelines and ethics around humanity first, diversity, inclusion, and community development. So this is the framework that I've been using just to help make sense of the metaverse, and I wanted to just share that here with folks this morning, just to help you set a larger context for when we talk about the metaverse, all these other things. Um, I'm not. See if there's any. Just very quickly, as I mentioned before, just to wrap up. As I think about moving into the experience economy, we're moving from commodities, goods, and services into staging experiences. And so there's larger aspects of the metaverse that is moving into the experiential age. And so the experience economy and Pine and Gilmore's, edge work in this area goes all the way back to like 98, 99 with the book that they came out. But they're talking about, different ways of thinking about experiences that are revealing over a stage of time. It's about giving you these sensory experiences. And this is a lot of talking about like Starbucks as an example, or when you go into the coffee shop, they're not just buying coffee, you're getting a whole experience. And so, what are the music that's playing, and what's the branding, and what's the whole vibe from the onboarding to offboarding? Thinking about that whole experience as an experience and experiential marketing, then that's a lot of the influence of this kind of thinking from Pine and Gilmore that is starting to start that started in marketing, experiential marketing, but is moving into the immersive theater and experiential design at large. And experiences are things that unfold over time. And I wanted to just quickly give how I think about this in terms of this quote from Robert McKee, which is true character is revealed in the choices the human being makes under pressure. The greater the pressure, the deeper the revelation, the truer the choice to the character's essential nature. So another way of thinking about that is that you're being placed within a certain context, you're making choices and taking action, and then your character is revealed in an unfolding process over time. So this is essentially what's happening when you have an immersive experience is that you have the immersive technologies that are recreating all the different contextual aspects of making you feel like you're in this virtual place that is recreating a very specific context. It's making choices and taking action. So there's all these different qualities of presence that are there. And then because normally when you're watching a movie, you're watching other people in these situations that take action. But in this case, you're the one that's in these experiences and you're the one taking action. And so it's part of your own essential character that's being revealed as you're going through a variety of different immersive contexts. So you can think about the context, quality, character, and story elements of an immersive experience. Um, and just the presence aspect, I think, is probably one of the more important ones. Also, context is huge, but the active presence, mental, social presence, emotional presence, embodied environmental presence, and looking at how video games are a lot about active presence and the both the uh, social media and the cell phones and internet and literature, all the mental and social presence. So using language and words to be able to communicate ideas, but also to communicate with other people. And if you have information on the World Wide Web. So a lot of this will be like WebXR and stuff for to be able to take the human computer interactions that have been developed within web design and web development and how we interact with the technology. That a lot of those are going to be translated from 2D into 3D as well. But as we have more WebXR, we'll get more of this quality of mental and social presence. But a lot of it has been the gaming to start with, but the film also cinematic insights from filmmaking and television, lighting, music, all these other aspects that are being fused into all these things coming together with the theater and dance and different aspects of the sensory experience of your embodiment of making you feel like you're actually there. And so this is the new thing of virtual and augmented reality is adding this new qualities of embodiment. And last, so taking action, making choices, emotional immersion, and sensory experience. And the last slide that I'll show here for now is how I think about the different communication media, how each media, as you progress, it's kind of including the previous media. So you have the oral storytelling to theater, books, film, radio, TV, video games, internet, mobile phone, and then virtual and augmented reality. With each new of these layers, it's adding new affordances. So, like say, video games is new qualities of agency and interactivity, and then the mobile phones, a lot of mental and social presence. And then the virtual and augmented reality are new aspects of embodied environmental presence. And so you're taking and fusing all these previous communication media together. So as I think about the metaverse, I think about how it's, as you add this embodiment and then add these environments and able to go into all these different contexts, then what are you able to get out of that? And just briefly, the context, I think we'll probably be covering a lot of the other non-gaming, non-entertainment context throughout the course of the day. And this is just one way to start to look at all these different aspects of the contextual dimensions. When I ask people the ultimate potential of VR, they usually answer into one of these different domains. So entertainment, education, travel, your career, hanging out with friends and family, expressing your identity, uh, connecting with partners. Um, and as we translate some of these different into more nuanced aspects, this is from the XR Ethics Manifesto. Then there's lots of different ethical implications for each of these different contextual domains. But VR is allowing you to be embedded into a variety of these different contexts, and I think that's what makes it quite unique. And I talked a little bit about this larger aspect of the metaverse framework because that's another contextual domain. And then the intersectional axes of privilege and domination. Basically, there's lots of things that you need to be able to be diverse and inclusive to be able to look at different perspectives of able-bodiedness and people who need accessibility issues or the different gender biases that may be there inherent into certain communities or class bias or lots of different axes of privilege and making sure that the technology is not unduly amplifying some of those oppressions that are happening within our culture. So that's another contextual dimension. So anyway, the context, quality, character, and story. I'll stop there because I feel like I don't want to go on and on and on. But hopefully that gave you a bit of a sense of how I start to think about the immersive technologies. Um, so yeah, hopefully we on top. Oh, I went 5 minutes over. Sorry about that. So um, anyway, I'll sort of pass it back over to April is going to go next, and then thanks for your patience, and hopefully that'll help set some larger context as we move forward today.
Thank you very much, Kent. I appreciate it. Good hello and good morning, everyone. I'm going to start out here with a nice big old picture of myself. My name is April Speight, and I lead the Spatial Computing Cloud Advocacy team at Microsoft. Our cloud advocacy team advocates on behalf of and to technical communities such as the XR community. I joined the space in 2019 after seeing a HoloLens 2 demo, which featured real-time speech translation from English to Japanese. And I was personally really amazed at how an area in which I loved, which is speech, was integrated into virtual social interactions. So this predated my knowledge of social virtual platforms. And so to have seen this for the first time was mind-blowing. With the help of folks within the XR community, I was able to get my hand on not one, but 2 devices, and I was given a plethora of resources just to help me get started. Fast forward to today, I spend a great amount of time in the developer community helping new devs onboard into XR development. So having spent 2.5 years now in this space, one thing that I noticed is that there's a lack of conversation that's being held around D&I and safety as it relates to engaging in XR, also known as extended reality. So with the recent game popularity of concepts such as the Metaverse, I also sought out to go around talking about D&I and safety whenever I was giving a platform to do so. And so today, I'm here to continue on that path and uncover some topics and concepts I'd like for you to consider as you're venturing out into the meta world and contributing to the Metaverse. So you may hear some overlap with regards to what Kent just shared. So I'm gonna start out by talking about data privacy. And so when it comes to data privacy, there's so many data points that can be tracked and or collected from engaging with AR and VR apps. So whether it's creating a new user account, entering our names, or enabling location tracking so that way we can enjoy a more localized experience, or even accepting access to our camera so that way we can try the latest AR filter, it's virtually become even easier for people to give someone else our data. And we can sum this data into what is referred to as PII, so personal identifiable information. And with PII, it's information that permits the identity of an individual to whom the information applies to be reasonably inferred by either direct or indirect means. And as a society, we've gotten a little better at giving people more control over how data is collected from us. And honestly, still not a day goes by where I have to restrict cookies and check off items on a website list for what I do and don't want to be tracked. And as it relates directly to XR, there's other ways in which data can be collected that goes beyond browsing to a website. So consider eye tracking as an example. So eye tracking is a feature that's available on some head-mounted devices, most notably on smart glasses. And you'd be amazed at what can be inferred from eye tracking due to eye opening, the closure, eye movements, eye status, pupil characteristics, and iris characteristics. And so I have some examples of inferences that can be made, and we can infer personality traits, a person's mental health, their skills, their abilities, their level of sleepiness, cognitive processes, their drug consumption, age, biometric identity, their cultural background, physical health, geographical origin, their gender, and also their mental health workload. So that's a lot of inferences that can be made simply from just tracking someone's eyes. Now, biometrics is an interesting one, and I've seen it used for both good and bad. I have an example to share, but before I get into that story, let's define what biometrics are, just to ensure that we're all in alignment on definitions. So biometrics is the recognition of an individual by means of unique physical characteristics such as facial recognition, voice recognition, or body movement. And biometrics is also a subset of verification data. And so for context, I have smart assistants in our home, and the one that I have happens to be programmed to recognize my own voice over anyone else that may utter commands. So if I were to say what's on my calendar for today, the device will give me a summary of my meetings. However, if my partner did the same thing, the device would have no response because it hasn't recognized or hasn't been programmed to recognize his voice. And so let's check out how biometrics are applied in the XR world. So a 2019 article written by Jessica Outlaw, director of the Outlaw Center for Immersive Behavioral Science at Concordia, and Susan Persky, head of Immersive Simulation Program at the National Genome Research Institute, identified a guy named Riley who played a game that featured a VR maze similar to what I have here on the screen. So Riley played this room scale game in his living room, and he was joined by friends from their own respective locations. So it was a multi-user experience. And Riley could make eye contact in the game with his friends. He could also give virtual high fives by slapping the avatar's hands, which in return gave a sensation of haptic feedback from the controller. So unfortunately, the startup who created the game sold users tracking data. And a single 20-minute session could record 20 million points of data about Riley's body movement. And the company didn't just sell data to one entity, they sold to multiple companies, one being an insurance company. So about a month after playing the maze game, Riley applied for and was turned down for a new life insurance policy. And he was confused because he had excellent health, and he went through a long battle of filing appeals for the company's decision. And the insurance company eventually disclosed that Riley's tracking data from the VR maze game revealed behavioral movement patterns often seen among people in the early stages of dementia. And unfortunately, it didn't stop there. Riley's sister, someone who never played this VR maze game a day in her life, was also later rejected for life and long-term policies. And the reason? Well, dementia tends to run in families. And so I know that may be quite of an extreme example, but these are real-world examples that do occur. And what I want you to take away from that is, on the end user side, it's imperative to be cognizant of what we're giving permission to when we're trying out AR and VR experiences. On the developer side, it's a matter of ethics. And so it's not necessarily just ensuring that we individually are ethically sound and that we're not exploiting user data, but it's also ensuring that our partners and our teammates that we're working alongside are also engaged, aren't engaging in malicious activity either. And so next up from data, I have avatars. So avatars, they're a virtual representation of ourselves in the virtual world. And our avatars can either be identical to how we look in the real world, or they can reflect how we want to represent ourselves in the virtual world. So for example, I tend to customize my avatars to look as close to possible as myself in the real world, but someone else may choose to have a space alien as their avatar, and neither are wrong. It's really just a matter of personal preference. However, what can be wrong is the lack of diversity in avatar creation features. So I have a friend who attended a virtual conference back in December, and the platform used required attendees to create avatars. And so my friend, she showed me her avatar, and the first question I asked her was, "Why is your avatar so light?" So my friend, who shares similar brown skin complexion as myself, responded by saying that was the only option that I had. So skin tone, hairstyle, and just facial features in general might not be a big deal to some people. However, it's a pretty big deal for a lot of us who are underrepresented in society. So what ends up happening is that we find ourselves settling for avatar creation options that are in no way close to what we would prefer. And this extends beyond facial features. There's cultural characteristics as well. So if an avatar system doesn't include a hijab, for example, what do women who wear a hijab do in those situations? For some people, religious and cultural beliefs don't just disappear because you're now in a virtual environment. And then there's a matter of body types and different abilities. If someone has a mobility impairment and thus navigates the world via their wheelchair, what message is being shared for if we're only giving them options for avatars that fully stand? Are we given that impression that something isn't normal by about their own lived experiences? So that can be a problem as well. So these considerations matter, especially as it relates to the concept of embodiment. So, embodiment is what someone experiences when avatars are co-located from in first person perspective. We mentally take on how our avatars look. We feel that our own body has been substituted by the self avatar and that the new body avatar is the source of sensations. So, in 2018, at Microsoft, we published a research report on avatars, which notes that embodiment is complex. And it not only includes body ownership over the avatar, but also agency, co-location, and external appearance. And so despite the multiple variables that influence embodiment, the illusion is quite robust, and it can be produced even if the self-avatar is of a different age, size, gender, or race from the participant's own body. And so because I love stories, I have another story to share with you to give you some perspective. A 2021 study presented at the CHI conference on human factors in computer systems concluded that when using muscular avatars in a VR spin studio, participants completed an intense workout more easily than when they use avatars with less defined muscular structure. And the effect just wasn't mental. Participants embodying the muscular avatars also had a lower heart rate during workouts than when they embodied avatars designed with lower percentages of muscle and high percentages of body fat. So in this study, there were 24 participants in Germany. They pedaled on bikes while wearing VR headsets in 20-minute intervals. The participants were evenly split by gender, and they were college students as well as working professionals who did not cycle regularly. So for the experiment, they cycled 3 times, one as each of the avatars. And then the headset showed the participants in a virtual fitness room facing a mirror that reflected the avatar and what they were seeing on a stationary bike, moving in sync with the participants. The participants also wore heart rate monitors and rated how much effort they were exerting about every 5 minutes throughout the workout, while the bikes recorded their pedaling frequency. After these workouts, participants filled out a survey answering how fit they thought their avatar looked, how fast they thought their avatar was going, and other questions. They also assessed how closely they identify which avatar, relating to 2 statements. The first being that I felt that the virtual body I saw when looking at myself in the mirror was my own body. And then the second being, I felt as if I had 2 bodies. So with muscular avatars, participants felt that they had exerted the least effort and had significantly lower heart rates. With the non-muscular avatars, they exerted the most effort and had higher heart rates. The authors of this study connect their findings to what is known as the Proteus effect. So this psychological phenomenon, named for the Greek shape-shifting god, describes how people who use an avatar adopt the behavior and attitudes associated with the avatar's characteristics, such as its height or its conventional attractiveness. Now, this phenomenon, however, is a temporary effect, and it occurs while you're embodying the avatar. What I want you to take away from this is that avatar systems matter, and they can greatly influence self-perception. So if you happen to work in an area that focuses on avatar creation, consider inclusivity in your design. It's going to make a really big difference. Next, we have accessibility. So there's a lot to cover as it relates to accessibility. However, I'm going to focus on 2 areas today, and that being mobility or audio and mobility. So I'm going to first start off with audio. Having great audio can truly enhance one's experience, especially if it's in VR. And there's 4 types of auditory cues that are often used in XR experiences. The first is going to be ambient auditory cues. So ambient sound is the background noise in an environment. So it can be the noise in a busy city or the sound of a TV that's playing off in another room. And then next, there is going to be the object auditory cues. And so that's going to be the sound that's produced from object. So if I have a scene where there's an air conditioning unit, I could make the object seem more real by accompanying it with the sound of an air conditioning humming. And then there's movement auditory cues. So with these are the sounds that are results of movement. So if someone were to run across pavement, we would expect to hear their feet hit the ground when they're running. And then finally, there's informational auditory cues. And so informational cues, this is audio that provides instructions. So essentially, it could be step-by-step instructions on how to operate machinery, as an example. Now, while these cues are helpful to create a truly immersive experience, we have to consider those who are hearing impaired. And so people with a hearing impairment, such as myself, can experience difficulty in XR experiences when we require captions for audio dialogue or when sign language is not supported. Therefore, consider integrating features such as the ability to turn off ambient soundscapes, providing visual or haptic equivalents in place of audio, providing us with the control for the location of spatialized audio, and then also the ability to turn on captions. So these are the examples that I just gave. Forgot to turn the slides. And then as it relates to mobility, engaging in XR experiences can be a challenge for those with mobility impairment as well. So more often when developers create experiences, the quote unquote norm is that the end user will be able to move around their real world environment with ease. And that's not just limited to walking, but also the ability to move other body parts such as their heads and their arms, legs as well. However, as we all know, we do not live in a fully mobile world. And so people with mobility impairments should also be able to take part in XR apps and experiences, regardless of whether they can use standard controllers or move around with their feet. So some challenges that people with mobility impairments face are using input devices, head trackers, as well as locomotion. Personally, I spent 2 months in 2019 unable to walk because I had surgery on both my left and my right foot at the same time. So I was pretty much bound to the couch or the bed. And so during that time, I pretty much put VR on pause because I didn't want to deal with the difficulty of trying to move around in apps that weren't considerably inclusive in their user experience design. And although my situation was temporary, the reality is that mobility impairment is permanent for a lot of people. And we just can't exclude those individuals, even if it does take longer to create the app. Those individuals are worth it. So as you're creating your experiences, I want you to consider integrating the following features. So first, the ability to adjust time limits. So if your app requires a response in X amount of time, consider a feature that would enable someone to adjust the time limit so that they have sufficient time to process their input. And speaking of input, there's also enabling multiple input devices. And so using adaptive controllers is a complete game changer. However, if your app doesn't support input mapping to an adaptive controller, then people are bound to only use the standard input, which is typically a controller that comes with the device. And so that's not necessarily going to be helpful for everyone's use case. And then finally, there's a focus indicator. So you can implement something like this with eye tracking, whereas if a person is looking at a virtual object, you can implement logic that this is where they are focusing, and then they can subsequently perform the action. So next up, we have safety. And it's a matter of safety when you're engaging in social virtual interactions. And so what I have here on the screen, I have you as the individual in the middle, your friend to your left, your foe to your right. When you are in these spaces, especially when you're engaging with people that you may not know, you do, it can be a bit more of a challenge if you run into situations where you're being harassed in social environments. And unfortunately, although there are controls put in place across different platforms on how to deal with harassment, it's not completely robust all around, but there are improvements that are being made. So if you are creating these social environments where people can all come together, consider the features that I have here. One, having boundaries. So that way, if I happen to be in a virtual space, I can enable this boundary around me. So that way people cannot come within a certain proximity. Another would be the ability to remove users as well. Muting users is also a good one. So that way, if I had the ability to mute someone else there, meaning like only I can't hear them, but maybe everyone else can, that's a really good, helpful feature. Solo mode. So if you want to be able to engage in an interaction, but just pretty much by yourself, that would be a solo mode. Perfect example, meta venues, I think that's what they're calling it now, when they do sports events and you can actually go to the games in VR. They actually have this mode where you can either be among everybody that's there or you can just be by yourself in a room. So something like that is like what I've done in the past, and that's more like a solo mode. Approving interactions is another one. And so that would be, if folks want to connect with you in a virtual space, being able to say, yes, I want to interact with this person, or no, that's really helpful as well. And then more important, the ability to report. And so providing people with a way to report harassment or issues that they're experiencing with other users is really helpful. At least that way we know that we are being heard. And so when it comes to abuse and harassment, Please share this information with others or even yourself as you are engaging. But if someone in an immersive environment threatens, abuses, or harms you or someone in your care, make sure that there's a collection of evidence, it's reported, and that from there, this person can be blocked and then also to seek further support. Unfortunately, not every social VR platform has these capabilities in place. But if you happen to be working in this area or with others, I would suggest being able to ensure that these sort of features are going to be implemented. And so final section today for this talk, which is the digital divide, is a very big soft spot of mine. And digital divide, quote for myself, it's a problem that we have yet to resolve, and we can't expect the metaverse to resolve this problem all on its own. And so what we're experiencing is that, or at least what I've experienced, is that a lot of people are excited about the metaverse. It's coming, or it's here, if you will, already, which is great. And people feel that it's going to change life in general. However, there's still so many people on this earth who still do not have access to just internet to begin with. And the metaverse runs essentially, for the most part, on internet. And so when it comes to internet, 3.7 billion people in this world do not have access. And so that became even more evident in 2020 with the onset of the pandemic. And so fewer than 1 in 5 people in the least developed countries are connected to the internet. What does that mean? They are being left out of this concept of metaverse that everyone is going around talking about. And so a concept that's more or less runs on the very technology that's disproportionately distributed across the world. It can only be used by those with access, also quote from me, but it's true. And so I want you to think about that as well as we're thinking about how much metaverse, if you will, is going to change things. And just know that there are people who are being left behind. So on the flip side, how can we help? So if you're interested in helping closing the digital divide, there's some suggestions that are provided here. One is providing access to hardware. That's a big one. Hardware prices across the board vary significantly. And if we're requiring folks, let's say in schools, for students to participate in social interactions with their classmates and they don't have the actual devices they need, well, now they're going to fall behind in that respect. Another is providing access to educational material. That's one of the things that my team at Microsoft does, which is providing educational content that can be used in schools to help others learn. Mentoring those in underserved and underprivileged communities. That's another big one. Unfortunately, these are the communities that are often left behind when new technology is on the rise. And so being a mentor in those communities is also really great, especially if you have resources to give. And then also donating hardware that's no longer in use. I had a device that I had for about 2 years and it was just sitting here collecting dust. I donated it to a friend that couldn't afford a device, but he had been creating a lot of things, doing all simulations in the Unity editor. So I said, here, I'm going to go ahead and give you my device. And so whether or not you have devices sitting around, it's not a matter of that, but it's more so for those of us who do have things like this sitting around available, people who do have the time, people who do have the resources, please give back to others so that way learning and engaging in metaverse doesn't just stop with us, but that others also have an opportunity as well. And so that's what I have to conclude for my presentations. If you want to stay in touch, I am on Twitter at Vogue and Code. And then I'm also on LinkedIn as well. I have the link here, but it's if you go to linkedin.com/n/April Speight, that's where you can connect with me there. And I do believe we have a Q&A. Hi, Kent.
Hey, April, thank you so much for that great overview of a lot of aspects that are really quite important when it comes to XR technologies as we move forward. We have a number of different questions that have been coming in. First, is there a source for that story that you shared from the biometric tracking insurance?
Yes. So what I can do, I have a long list of resources from research that I've done in this area. What I'll do is I'll share them on my LinkedIn. So do please connect there. I have to extract everything from the list that I had. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll have a post on there that I'll have a link to all the different research that I pulled together around this area, including some things I didn't get a chance to talk about as it relates to accessibility as well.
Okay. Another question that came in and saying that Matthew Miller is saying that he's a big fan of Microsoft. Big congrats on the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. He imagines that this IP may provide a foundation for some unique areas in the metaverse. But what is your team and Metaverse doing to protect users from a dystopian Ready Player One IOI world?
Yes. So I will say for our team within advocacy, we sit outside of the product team. And so the product team, they're the ones that's owning that metaverse story and Microsoft's approach. We take direction from them with regards to how we then in return go out and talk about metaverse. And so the team is doing work right now to craft that messaging. And so in the interim, until we get that further direction, what our team is responsible for doing is ensuring that as we're out and about talking to the developer community and educating, we are doing things like I've done today, which talks more about the safety side of things. And so right now, I would say I don't have a direct answer, as that team is the one that provides that message going forward. But once we get further messaging from them, then that's when we have our ability to go out and then share that message. So I would say, don't have an answer right at this exact moment, but does not mean that one's not being put together. But at some point, yes, I'll be able to talk more about our approach for that.
Okay, we'll just have time for one or two more questions, and then we'll move on to the networking. But for accessibility, are there standards or plugins that are gaining any steam or to be used across experiences, or do we need time to adopt accessibility improvements? Any resource we can subscribe to for more tips? One tip that I have just off this bat is XR Access, and XR Association has a GitHub repository where they're starting to aggregate some of these different best practices for code for accessibility. So I'd definitely check out that as a resource on GitHub. It's a collaboration between XR Access and XR Association. But I don't know if you have any other tips or for folks for accessibility.
Yeah, so Berkeley Universal Design for Learning, they have an XR accessibility section webpage that actually has a lot of information around XR and accessibility. Again, I'll have to drop that into that LinkedIn post that I'll make, because there is the website's pretty robust, but that's one place that I've gone to read a bit more about accessibility. There's other articles here and there. I just wish I had the list ready to just give you the links to everything, but I will say that LinkedIn post that I'll make, please reference that. That's where I'll have more links to where you can go to find out more about accessibility in XR.
Okay. And the last question here is, will companies that are adopting this XR VR experiences be mindful of the ethical implications? For example, as a female gamer, my experience will unfortunately be impacted by past experiences with the open world and unmoderated experiences in games. It would be nice to have more studies on this to be proactive.
Can you repeat the very first half of it? I'm sorry.
Oh, are there will the companies be mindful of the XR ethics? So, just if there's ways for the people that are involved in this to be for ethics, and any other thoughts on how the companies will ensure an ethical approach to a lot of these technologies?
Yeah, I would say it's relative to the company, to be honest with you. I can only speak from our experience and for the work that we do here at Microsoft. So there have been opportunities, even for example, for our advocacy team to come in and take part in providing what we've learned from being out in the community, feedback that we've also gotten from the community, and bringing it back to the product teams. So that way to ensure that solutions are being implemented that are ethically sound. And so it comes down to who you're actually working with. If your company doesn't have this space, if you will, to provide input for others and also consider other point of views, other lived experiences, you're going to run into those issues. So with companies that are working in these areas, so long as they have that space for people to actually provide that input, and that not everyone across the board looks the same either. I think having diverse teams is also a really big role when we're creating these sort of environments. And so that is really what it comes down to, making or breaking a difference, just ensuring that not everyone in the room looks the same, sounds the same, talks the same, is the same, but that you also have a diverse group of folks that are in the room that are helping to build these products. And that is something that I can say I've experienced in my time with the company I'm at. With other companies, though, just can't speak on behalf of those, but it might be the case that they also are doing things similar. But that's something that I've seen that has been helpful in that respect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your presentation and overview of a lot of these really important ethical issues. And I just really appreciate you kind of speaking on and covering a lot of these different areas. And I think the more that we have these types of discussions, I think it's be great for the overall industry. So yeah, thanks again for joining us. And we're going to be moving on now to the networking section. There's actually On the left-hand side, you'll see a rooms tab. And if you click on that, then there's going to be a number of different rooms that you can go, and there's different topics that you can go and join those rooms and discuss the kind of like the birds of a feather type of discussions that are going to happen. So we're going to have about a half hour or 25 minutes or so. You're going to get a reminder about 15 minutes ahead of time that we're going to have the next speaker that's happening at the half hour. I think I believe at 9:30 Pacific, I think is my time here locally. But you'll I guess, yeah, go off into that rooms tab and go have some discussions and networking, and we'll continue on the day. All right. Some nice hold music there. I was appreciating that. But welcome back, everybody, as we continue on our next. And I think as I'll probably give a few minutes as people start to get back, as we start to move on to the next part of our day. And I think, I don't know if they said it at the top, but I just wanted to also just acknowledge the Lethbridge College for putting this on. Thanks so much about putting this on. And I don't know if there was a land acknowledgement that happened, but this is on the traditional lands of Blackfoot Confederacy. And they have a number of different leaders from Microsoft, Unity, Viacom, and Ubisoft that are going to be joining us throughout the course of the day. And yeah, thanks to the sponsors, RINSA, RINSA, RISNA, and Alberta Innovates for the support for the event. And I think as the next section, we're going to be actually talking about some of the S.T.A.R.T Centre presentations. I'll be very curious to hear what's happening there at Lethbridge College. And I wanted to now introduce both Mike McCready and Tyler Heaton for our main stage. And also, before I pass it over to them, I wanted to remind everybody that there's some giveaways that are happening today. So make sure to get more, to check out the full contest details that are pinned in the chat box. If you go to the chat box, there's more information about the giveaways that are happening. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Mike and Taylor, who are working at Lethbridge College, and they're going to be talking to you about some of the different applied XR research that's happening here through the S.T.A.R.T Centre. So Mike and Tyler, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kent. Like Kent was saying, we're going to talk a little bit briefly about our S.T.A.R.T Centre at Lethbridge College. And I'm not going to go into the origin story as much, but I would love to go through that later at a later date if you're interested. But there's been a lot of exciting things happening over the last few years. And I'll just do a brief intro and let Tyler introduce himself. So my name is Mike McCready. I'm the Program Research Chair of S.T.A.R.T, as well as an instructor at Lethbridge College. And really excited to be a part of this journey that the college is on and looking at XR research. Go ahead, Tyler.
Thanks, Mike. As mentioned, I'm Tyler Heaton. I'm also an instructor in a number of programs here at the Lethbridge College, and I'm a researcher in the Spatial Technologies Applied Research and Training Center, or the S.T.A.R.T Center. And yeah, I'm really happy to be presenting with you today and chatting and networking and behind the scenes. We have a bit of a control center going on here, so I'll be bouncing around throughout the day, but I'm really excited to talk to you today about what the S.T.A.R.T Center is and where we're going with it.
Awesome. So I won't go through a lot of these details, but the S.T.A.R.T Center has a number of goals looking at applied research with industry and how can we help industry be able to create technologies that can be commercialized. We've got a number of partners and projects that we're working on that at the end of the day, these tech companies will be able to commercialize this platform that we're working on with them to grow their business. Looking at how we can help organizations to integrate spatial technologies into their processes to improve safety, increase bottom line, improve efficiencies, et cetera. And looking at how we can provide access to cutting edge technologies and expertise. We'll talk a little bit about some of our tech that we're bringing in, and it's super exciting for our area and for all of Alberta. And then be able to provide experiential learning opportunities for our students and grads, which we'll talk about in a few moments here. One of the things that's really exciting is with the S.T.A.R.T Centre at Lethbridge College is looking at a number of ways that we could provide services, whether it's through custom XR software development or consulting on platforms or tools, researching XR hardware. There's a lot of ways that we look to collaborate with our partners, and we'll talk about those later and share with you how you can be involved, because at the end of the day, the S.T.A.R.T Centre is really about growing the ecosystem and helping organizations improve their services, but also the tech companies to improve their services as well. When we look at the S.T.A.R.T Centre, one of the things is really like a triad approach, is looking at working with industry, That's the tech companies, the XR companies in Alberta and Canada and beyond, working with community organizations. There's a number of projects that we're working on where community nonprofit organizations or government is a partner in that project. But one of the most important areas is our students and our grads. Every project that we work on, and we have a number, has either a current student or a number of current students or a recent grad of our program, because we believe, as I talked earlier in the session today, that creators are going to power the metaverse, and we want to provide opportunities for these future creators to gain experience and to improve their confidence and their abilities. Okay. So the animations didn't come through here. So you'll have to do some deciphering there, Tyler.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Mike. So I'm just going to quickly jump to that slide on my computer. And when we were building the S.T.A.R.T Centre and we were looking at ways that we could collaborate with both industry and community, we wanted to build it around pillars. And those pillars are industry pillars: agriculture, trades, first response, architecture, healthcare, and tourism and heritage. We saw these as being parts of the business and community that will be impacted by spatial technologies, and there are many more. And through those pillars, those industry pillars, we also identified 3 key research themes that will help guide us in our collaborations, and that's the spatial data collection, or collecting spatial data through various means. We'll talk about the tech stack in a little bit. Authenticity, and building that authenticity into all of the experiences that we create. And we recognize that authenticity is a big part of VR experiences, especially, and I say VR, but because that's what we're working on at the early stage, but all kinds of XR experiences, because that authenticity allows us to make it meaningful for the participant, whether that's training, whether that's audience members in entertainment, whether that's somebody who's using it for healthcare. That authenticity is key. And the last one is development of deployment technologies. And so this is, how do we get those experiences into the hands of users? How do we give people access? And we heard so much about accessibility from April, and those are, themes and pieces that we want to build into all of the collaborations and the projects that we work on.
Awesome.
And so to give you some examples of projects that we have been working on, this is the Dinosaur Tracks site. So this is a project that we started nearly 2 years ago. I can't believe it's been so long, but Grand Cache is a community in northern Alberta that has this amazing natural resources, which is these dinosaur tracks that were captured in mud and then, millions of years ago, and are now only accessible through virtual reality and augmented reality, because this site actually is in the middle of a mine, and it's, kilometers and kilometers away from the community, and it's too dangerous to access to the public, for the public to access. And so they wanted a way to share this natural resource, and I say this natural heritage resource, with the community and attract people to find out more about the dinosaur tracks. And so this project was built to give people access in a fun and engaging way that allowed them to see what this site looks like and interact with the information when they couldn't go there physically. And so it's one of those, key tenets of virtual reality, is that if it's not accessible, if it's too dangerous, if it's too expensive, there's a use for virtual reality technology. And so this is one of the examples. And we used a variety of technologies to give people access to this site. The next example is working with one of our partners, our industry partners, Red Iron Labs, out of Calgary, on a Alberta Innovates funded project that explores how can we use virtual reality to impact self-efficacy in caregiver situations for people who are suffering from dementia and other illnesses. And so this is a project that we are continuing to work with them on, that's exploring that embodiment and that interaction in a meaningful way that allows people to gain some experience, hands-on experience, in a situation that normally would be difficult or perhaps dangerous for both parties. And so by using that VR, we're giving people access to something that they can go over and over again and do training in without having to create a complex scenario.
Awesome. And I won't go through these, but this is just an example of some of the other projects that we're working on within the S.T.A.R.T Centre. And there's a lot of excitement and a lot of projects in the industry who are wanting to collaborate and partner and work with us. Over the last 2 years, so the S.T.A.R.T Centre really has been around for 2 years is when I took on a role to start looking at applying XR research at the college. And over that 2 years, we've seen the S.T.A.R.T Centre bringing over $2 million in grants, industry, and partnerships, and there's no end in sight. We're super excited with the support of the leadership at Lethbridge College, with the support of our partners and the granting agencies who are seeing value in what we're doing.
And one of the most exciting things for me as a technologist and a person who likes toys is that a good deal of that funding was for equipment. And that technology goes into our research with those pillars. And the main areas where that technology is being built up is in the areas of capturing or recording spatial data, creating content and creating all kinds of different experiences, looking at access, so whether that's cloud technology, whether that's device technology, and then experience. How do we deliver those experiences to the end user, to the audience, to the participant in a meaningful way? So what's next for the S.T.A.R.T Centre? Well, it's all about collaboration. It's all about working with community, working with industry. It's all about putting these technologies into play. We don't have enough time to really get into deeply on the technologies, but if you want to hear more about it, we can chat afterwards and we can talk about specifics. But the next step for us is to really connect with different community organizations, connect with companies, and bring our students along for that research and that development in an applied way that helps all of us grow. And that means that we're looking at these areas to continue to grow. And part of that is, we're hiring. We're looking for to strengthen our team in the area of machine learning and AI. And we see that that is a big part of the growth of the metaverse and the growth of spatial computing and technology. And we're looking for people to join with us as we look at areas like virtual beings and machine learning, physics simulation, and that's what we're looking for right now to grow our team.
Yeah, so take a look if you want at this URL where the job posting is, and we're really excited to have this opportunity. One of the things really quickly that we've done in the past is we've done, when Tyler talked about connecting, is we've had a number of VR book clubs. Here are the titles that we have read and talked about, and it's really kind of meta. I don't know if we can say that word. Do they trademark that? But we're in VR talking about VR or AR. And we've had, what's really exciting with all of these book clubs is we've had the authors. And if you haven't read these books, I highly, highly encourage you to read them. But we had all of the authors join us in VR, and we are excited about our next book club that we're reigniting this opportunity. We've got The End of Storytelling by Stephanie Riggs, and she's agreed to participate in one or both of these days. On March 4th and 11th from 3 to 4 p.m. Mountain, not Metaverse, Mountain time. And so there'll be more information on our Twitter feeds and our LinkedIn feeds, but we're really excited about this opportunity to learn together more and continue the conversation past this event.
And another thing that we're really excited to start today and to mention to you is workshops. One of the things that we want to do as a center and as a college is to get people building and get people working in this space. And to do that, we're introducing 3 workshops that will allow you to get your feet wet, get your hands dirty, whatever analogy you want to use, and start developing in this spatial technology realm. So we have an introduction to augmented reality where we use the SnapLens Studio to do prototyping and to create all kinds of amazing experiences. We have an introduction to 3D. We know that 3D and spatial data is key to the metaverse experience and a key part of all these technologies. So, getting started with some of these 3D tools is essential. And the third one here is that if you're not a modeler, but you want to get into 3D, photogrammetry is another tool that's excellent for creating 3-dimensional assets and allowing you to start working in that spatial media and spatial technology.
Awesome. And you'll notice on there the price and the URL. All attendees will be getting a discount code emailed to them that will allow them to take each of these workshops for $99 Canadian each. So if you're an American, that's like what, like $5. So it's it's a really good deal. So highly encourage you to take that out if you're looking at getting involved in the creating side. All right, and yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, so the last thing, as I mentioned, we're looking for collaborations, we're looking for partnership, we're looking to connect organizations and businesses and to all work together. And one of the things that I will say is, Mike mentioned that $2 million in funding. There are a lot of grants out there that are available to post-secondary that are working with industry, or available to industry when they're working with post-secondary. So let's work together, let's collaborate and share knowledge, but also, it's mutually beneficial that we can all get in on some of that grant funding that's so important for us as an institution, but so important for you as business and community organizations to allow you to grow. And we can really work together to explore this. So we invite you to find out more about what the S.T.A.R.T Centre is doing in collaborations. We invite you to find out more about what we're doing in the areas of education and working with our students as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both Mike and Tyler, for giving that overview of the S.T.A.R.T Centre. I'm really excited to see that all the different projects you're working on, but also just the book club is a lot of fun just to see, because there's very early and nascent in the industry in terms of what books are actually been written. So it's nice to be able to see those books, but also to hear that you've been bringing in those authors. We do have one question that came in from Alexi, who asks, it seems like there's a lot of empathy integration into Care GVR. Is that a common trend within VXR opportunities?
It absolutely is. And that's a great question, Alexi. Yeah, I mean, empathy is a big part of the VR experience or the XR experience because of embodiment, as Kent, you talked about earlier, this putting ourselves into these scenarios and these situations, it allows us to experience empathy. And I will say that it creates the opportunity for empathy. The technology itself does not create the empathy, but it creates the opportunity for us to experience empathy by putting us in situations where we can, be one-on-one with somebody, be in a social experience, allow us to connect. And so it's a very transformative and connective technology. And so I think that empathy is a huge part of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of debate around the TED Talk that was done by Chris Milk about VR as an empathy machine. And I do agree that there is a lot of capability for a contextual situation for empathy to arise, but I think there's a risk of thinking of VR as a technological determinist who thinks that it's just going to somehow just provide you with all the mechanisms of empathy. But we're still humans, and we still have all the need to be able to empathize with people. Yeah, there's a lot of actually debates around the VR as empathy machine trope. So yeah, I think what you're saying there definitely makes sense. So I think actually we're going to be moving on to the next section. Thanks again, Mike and Tyler, for giving us a little bit of an overview there. And this next section is actually quite interesting in terms of looking at the context of history of what some of the stuff that Ubisoft has been doing. They've been doing lots of really amazing high fidelity experiences within a lot of their different games. And I've actually saw at one of the different film festivals, they were able to actually translate some of that and to create an immersive experience that starts to explore different aspects of history. So I'm very curious to see in this next talk from a representative from, it's actually going to be Matt Todd is from Ubisoft, talking about some of the different applications of history that is happening there at Ubisoft. So Todd, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Matt.
Thanks very much. So there's my slideshow. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And I'm really honored to be here today among all these excellent speakers, and for, with also the people who really did the hardest work of all, and that is the organizers. I couldn't imagine trying to put something like this together right now. So a big doff of the cap to everybody who worked so hard and diligently getting this set up. I guess also I kind of want to add a caveat. I feel I have in my notes a little bit out of place, but I feel massively out of place actually, because I'm not a technical expert by any means. In fact, my education and training has taught me to look backwards for inspiration and not to the future. Yet as chance would have it, here I am. So today I'm going to do my best to cover some small topics with one goal in mind, explaining to the best of my ability why history matters at this very early stage of the metaverse, and why it's really, really important to think about the content before content is even created. So this is, I'm going to start with a slide, and I hope this works. If not, I can explain it. This is a clip from season 4 of The Simpsons. I can't remember which episode it is. It's Marge versus the monorail. The start of the episode finds Mr. Burns illegally dumping nuclear waste into a park, and he's forced to give the city $3 million. And they have a town meeting to decide how they should spend this money. Lisa, being the character that she is, decides that they should give the money to public schools, and this is what she imagines in her head. And is it going to play? All right. Well, this was a very, very insightful clip that is not going to play. It's a flashback to show Miss Hoover telling the students that they were getting ready for an ancient history lesson. And they all put on their virtual reality headsets, which at the time, in 1993, when this episode was made, was a full VR helmet complete with a large hose running out of the back. And then when Lisa puts it down, she's immediately transported to 13th century Mongolia, where she meets the guy on the screen there, Genghis Khan. And he tells her, you know, you'll do what I do, destroy what I destroy, defile what I defile, and so on. And so when I saw this in 1993 as a kid, this really stuck with me, this image. And it's one of the things that has, I've really been thinking about it as soon as I was asked to do this. I'm like, what does the metaverse in history mean? And especially given the fact that I work in gaming now, why is history so important? The Simpsons aside, perhaps how the metaverse will most drastically affect our lives is that the big obvious change will be that there will be a marked increase in experiences that take place in the metaverse as opposed to the real world. And even more exciting, and this makes me very excited and also very apprehensive as a historian, because along with real world experiences that can take place in the metaverse, there's also experiences that you can have there, should the metaverse reach the iterations that we think it will, that could never happen. And what I'm talking about essentially is time travel or visiting the past. This really excites me because, in all honesty, there's not been a real advancement to the study of history in a very long time. When I thought back on this, and I asked while I was in school, when I did my PhD, I did it almost exactly the same as my supervisor had done his 30 years previously. And if we really want to push the idea, I could say that it's very true. Computers and the internet have made research and writing much easier. However, my schooling wasn't appreciably different than somebody who got the same degree as I did 500 years ago. The crux was I wrote a monograph, I read a bunch of books, and I passed written and oral exams on those books. That is essentially how a degree in history works. And this is what I mean, like there hasn't been really good technological advancement for the study of history. The metaverse, VR, everything that this sort of conference is about really could be that leap forward in the study of history. Even if we're just allowing ourselves to visit ancient environments, or our textbooks, even if we're just visiting our textbooks in person, I think the ability to see it and to have a real meaningful exchange with it is going to drive new understandings and perceptions of the past. So this is what makes me optimistic about this. This is what excites me about this. However, as I noted a few moments ago, I am also very nervous about this as well, because there are a great number of pitfalls within academic history, and these are things that we'll have to think about while working on the creation of content for the metaverse, and even at these very, very early stages of the technology. So why does history matter? I might as well start really at the beginning because it is the easiest way to explain this. Way back before I became a working in video games, I was a university professor. I actually taught at Lethbridge College for a little while as well. One of the things that I used to ask my first year history courses was, why does history matter? I used to get a lot of really interesting answers, and a lot of them were just different ways of saying what I'm about to say now. And that is, history is really fundamental to understanding our world around us. I used to tell students that at the end of this class, if nothing else, or the end of this course, if nothing else, the news is going to make a little bit more sense because history informs the present. Through the study of history, we can then discover the world as it presently exists. Our world in its current state is a direct result of the developments and events of the past. And this is what Doc Brown now is trying, on the slide there, is trying to explain to Marty in Back to the Future Part 2. And that is when old Biff has stolen the sports almanac, gone back in time, created a new timeline. So the events begin to stack up, and that's what creates the future. Back to the Future did, for all of its flaws with time travel storytelling, did a really good job of explaining the relationship between the past and the present. So if we think about it, every war, every leader, every person who makes a decision is now contributing to the pile of facts that create the past, which shape the present. Our choices today will directly affect the future, just as the choices of the past directly affect our present. So, I mean, I could have used the Terminator series. The storytelling isn't quite as good there, though. But this is an idea that's been explored. It's got its own philosophy called teleology, and it isn't really new, but it helps to explain why history matters. So, history is an immensely important subject to study and to understand. I'm not saying that because my job literally depends on people believing that. I'm saying it because I honestly believe that it's true. History provides the answers to why the world is as it is, and it's an accurate understanding of the past as a result will present, an inaccurate understanding of the past will present an inaccurate understanding of the present. And this is what can cause a raft of misinformation. This means that as we move forward into the future, one of the most important things we can do is understand our place in the present through the past. And I honestly think that VR as an experience, as an interactive experience, is going to be immensely important in driving home the relationship between past and present, and therefore the relationship that people have with one another. And this is a really, really powerful thing. But again, it makes me nervous because I'm terrified right now to get this wrong. And I could not imagine getting something as important as this incorrect for future generations or for everybody who is going to experience it. And leads me to my next point. As the saying goes, trust is lost in buckets and gained back in drops. It is really, really unfortunate that history is either lost, deliberately misconstrued, misunderstood, or misinterpreted, or in many cases, entirely fictitious. Much of our understanding of history and the stories presented to us don't actually represent events in the past. They represent what people think happened or what they wish happened. We therefore often cannot truly understand the nature of the world around us because we've misunderstood this past. It's either become mythological or something that has been deliberately misleading to us by people who would find a benefit in doing that. I'm not going to sit here and complain about really early history because the idea of storytelling or history was really different then. So the very early stuff where there are mythological creatures, mythological characters doing great things. That's not the history that I'm really worried about. People thought differently way back then. However, what I'm more worried about is something called historiography. And I know everybody probably just rolled their eyes so hard they hit the back of their head hearing me say that I'm worried about something called historiography. But hear me out. Historiography is the history of history. And what it means is history, like anything else, is trendy. So people write certain ways because they want to remember things that way. One of the great examples of how history is affected by historiography is the War of 1812. So the War of 1812 was fought between Canada, as part of Great Britain at the time, and the United States. After the end of the War of 1812, the histories begin to emerge really quite quickly. The first histories come out immediately following the war, and they're focused on individuals. And on the Canadian side of the border, this is where I'm going to focus, this is usually British officers. So the history is very laudatory, and it extols the virtues of these British officers and their exploits in defending the empire and the glory of the British Empire itself. The next really big wave of literature about the War of 1812 comes after the creation of Canada as a nation state. It's a few generations later. And instead of focusing on those British officers, now it focuses on the regular citizens, specifically of Southern Ontario, who contributed and sacrificed to the War of 1812. And the discussion then centered was that, these men made a sacrifice, and this is part of the nation building process. So the War of 1812 created the type of people that created this great country, Canada. More recent historiographies, really beginning in the 1970s, but even before, finally started to talk about the contribution of Indigenous people in the War of 1812. Indigenous people from the Canada side especially were integral to this war. And obviously there's no success, especially this war is kind of strange that way, but the Indigenous people were very important and very central to the war itself. Only they didn't get mentioned in the history books for a really, really long time. And that is the problem of historiography. It means that going to create something like the metaverse isn't as simple as just picking up a textbook and then having 3D modelers recreate everything in that. You have to remember certain people wrote history certain ways. Some people will be excluded. Some people will be overemphasized. Some people de-emphasized. This is a serious issue in the study of history itself, and one that will become really apparent as the metaverse creates itself and begins to attempt to create really strong living or really strong places that you can visit. So if we can agree that it matters and that televisions and movies and books really have a responsibility to it, what does this mean then? Well, it means that it becomes increasingly difficult to separate history from entertainment. The idea of historical fiction as done through television, film, video games means that there needs to be some form of history in it. And if they aren't presenting things like this that are known to happen, then you're deceiving your audience. And this is what I mean by a question of trust. The audience is incredibly savvy and they know what to expect out of your video game, your movie, or your metaverse experience whenever that may come around. And deliberately misleading them will make them mistrust you. And then that trust is very, very difficult to win back. So, Matt, you're probably asking yourself, isn't this really just the job of history in classrooms? You know, shouldn't this reality be the focus of universities, of high schools, and whatever, to teach students what really happened? Well, and, you know, and why can't the metaverse have a little fun, use their imagination? Obviously, the entire metaverse doesn't need to be historically accurate, especially, and again, I'm imagining the metaverse as a Ready Player One, you know, way in the future. But and even if I thought that the entire metaverse needed to be historically accurate, the logistics of that would be absolutely bonkers to work with. So it's a non-starter. However, what's important is that where history is portrayed, even historical fiction, it should be as accurate as possible because of the reasons I mentioned, with history being so important to our understanding of the present. So that was my short section on why we should strive for accuracy as a tool, even when not necessarily doing things for education. Now, I'm going to take a sip of water because I'm losing my voice. For this portion of my talk, I'm going to engage with my industry a little bit and the insights from there, from gaming. So what can we learn from the need for accurate history in the metaverse from the world of games? Some of the most popular game series are those that use a historical setting. Research into player attitudes suggests that the standards that players hold for historical accuracy is really, really high. So they not only want it to look real, they actually want it to be as real as possible. And this obviously is most clearly iterated in the Assassin's Creed series, in Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed series. For those who don't know, Assassin's Creed series depicts a millennia-old conflict between the Assassin Brotherhood and the Templar Order. In the majority of the games, the player takes control of a historical assassin in the historical setting, and then there's cuts to modern day in the sci-fi framing. These games are known, and the players who love them really love them because they are immersive entry points into the past. They allow the player to not just do quests and other activities, but to literally visit the past through the excellent setting. This is something that Ubisoft has even expanded further on with the Discovery Tour, where you're playing as an actual person living in, for example, 9th century Northern Europe for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is, again, something that excites me and also makes me nervous. The idea of time travel, even if it did exist, doesn't really appeal to me because time travel would be immensely dangerous, and the past is not that pleasant of a place, depending on your opinion towards things like plumbing. So these sort of experiences, I think, are excellent because they allow you to visit the past in a safe way. But again, we're falling into the dangers of inaccuracy and accuracy that I'm going to continue to talk about. So the Assassin's Creed series has allowed players to explore Cleopatra's Egypt, the Middle East during the Third Crusade, the Renaissance, ancient Greece, pirate ships in Black Flag, and 9th century Northern Europe in Valhalla. So the power of these games is that they are immersive, and they are ones that young people are starting to play, and they become an entry point for the study of history. In all honesty, I had students when I was still teaching tell me that they got into history, or they wanted to take history because of games like Assassin's Creed that they played, and it really got their sort of their brain juices flowing and wanted to learn more. To be honest, I didn't have really any credibility with students until I got the job at Ubisoft, and now they really like listening to me. I'm just kidding. Okay, so some statistics. In a really good article from The Conversation, which is a wonderful sort of journal written by academics in a very approachable way on approachable topics, it was noted that 58% of players felt video game developers should minimize changes to the historical record. So most players don't want history altered. 21% really feel that this depends on the game. For example, if you're doing an RPG or something, then history probably can be altered a little bit more. One person noted in the questionnaire that, and I quote, unless a major part of the gameplay is creating an alternative history, or there's a major sci-fi fantasy element making the historical accuracy unimportant, developers should strive to make their games as accurate as possible. In general, respondents felt games needed to be fun and entertaining, so changes to history should be made to ensure that in a gaming area, otherwise the history should remain as intact as possible, and the developers should respect it. Another respondent put it, the developer should stay as close as possible to historical fact, unless doing so would hinder the gameplay of our story. And I'll get to that in a moment, what has happened because of that attitude. Some respondents even felt that this should be disclosed to people, that if we were changing history, we should let them know that, you know, the expectation was accuracy, and if we were going to be inaccurate, it should be something that was told to the player beforehand so they wouldn't feel misled or lied to. So what does this mean? It means that we're introducing history to a big audience, and this is a serious responsibility. Within the metaverse, this responsibility will increase. If I was good at math, I wouldn't have done history, but I can't imagine the exponential increase in importance that this would be or have for the metaverse and the level of experience that students have there. Television and movies was my entry point. I don't know how old everybody is, but that's the 1981 Clash of the Titans, and I watched that movie ad nauseum as a child. I know it came out in 81, so I watched it, you know, later when I was about 6 or 7 on VHS over and over again. And I honestly can credit that movie for getting me interested in history, and it is not even trying to be historically accurate. This is what I'm talking about. The shift now from movies and television, and I think to gaming, means that this entry point is something that needs to be taken seriously, because not only do they want accurate history, we kind of owe it to them not to lie. So what this means then is that gaming companies are hiring historians, and that's great. It means I have a job, and it also means that they recognize what their players want taken seriously. However, there is another side to this, and that is the problem of perception. There are certain areas of history, and this is especially true with architecture, that are so iconic, they inspire disbelief if you actually show them period correct. In Assassin's Creed Unity, there was the Notre Dame Cathedral was featured, and originally it didn't have its spire, as you could see there, because it wasn't part of the cathedral at the point in the game. And it was actually added in as an inaccurate aspect of the scenery because people really expected to see it. Another aspect of Notre Dame that was altered in order to facilitate gameplay was that the interior, you can traverse within the cathedral because it wasn't built in order to help you assassinate people, and when things needed to be moved around in order to allow for traversal and gameplay. The question of perception, though, and what people believe believe the past looks like is a really difficult problem. I'm not smart enough, not even close, to come up with a solution for this. but it is something that we do recognize is an issue when depicting the past ultra realistic. So hopefully, I guess what I've been doing sort of is meandering around and talking about how accuracy is a really complicated topic. As I said, it isn't just taking a textbook and giving it to a group of really good 3D modelers and saying, please do this. It's far more than that. Obviously, the metaverse represents a powerful new tool for teaching and learning history. We've learned from the gaming industry that there's an appetite among consumers for historical accuracy as part of a gaming experience. And we've also determined that historical inaccuracy can be part of the experience as long as it does not damage the overall narrative of the experience and does not perpetuate negative stereotypes or engender a false history that can breed mistrust or twist the understanding of the present. However, I've been dancing around perhaps the most important yet most difficult aspect of ensuring accuracy in the metaverse, and that is representation. Representation matters, and it matters a lot. This is especially critical for Indigenous and other histories of people who have been systemically abused through history. There is no real arguing that point, but it also raises the question, who gets to tell these stories? I, again, wish I had an answer. I have an idea, and my idea is that it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of collaboration between historians, anthropologists, Indigenous community members, and everybody in between in order to get this to the best version that it can be. So this is pretty aspirational history that I'm talking about. And so if I was going to give advice to a company that's going to exist in 40 years, maybe longer, maybe less, that's building a historical playground within something called the metaverse, whatever it turns out to be, I would advise them to be ready to do the hard work because it's not going to be easy. As a way to wrap things up, I wanted to make an observation that most science fiction that depicts a metaverse is decidedly dystopian. It's actually kind of an old trope by now. So I think that it's really positive that this conference was put together so we can think about more than the technology, and we can also think about the content, because the content is going to be very, very important to the user experience. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope that came in on time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt. That was really quite fascinating just to see all the different perspectives of historians, the fact that there's a demand for historically accurate information and how both the films and video games are actually hiring historians, which is great to hear. I was not actually aware of that. So that's also very great to hear. And we've got some questions that have come in, and I think we have time for maybe one or two questions here. So this question from Demetrio, thanks for raising this important topic. What type of frameworks do we need to separate fictional or wishful pasts from approximately realistic pasts? Should we have a meta wiki or history, or people can hop into a time and place to see an agreed upon version? So yeah, just some thoughts. Yeah, for me, I think of the multiple different perspectives and different feminist theory of having many different perspectives. And so I'm personally skeptical that there's going to be one universal truth, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that question.
I think that the idea of having the wiki and everything is probably the most workable one, at least that I can think of off the top of my head with 5 seconds to prepare on that question. And it's I can't stress like how I'm not qualified to ever build anything like this. I think it would be people smarter than me, a lot smarter, because the number of perspectives that are going to have to be taken into consideration will make a coherent narrative very difficult. And like Kent noted, There's not going to be one. And I think most of my point that I wanted to make during my talk was that this is not going to be easy.
Awesome. We have one more question here from Dylan. Do you see a potential threat to historical accuracy in upcoming game development? More specifically, with a storyline based on a specific area in world history, what can we do to tell the most accurate story without changing the narrative to fit our desired outcome of the game?
I don't think there's a threat really to historical accuracy coming from gaming, because I think our players realize that it is a game and there is going to be some liberties taken, especially around narrative, but also around architecture and things like that. Just for the reasons that I noted with Notre Dame, I mean, people didn't recognize it without its spire, and you can't climb through the rafters of Notre Dame because it's not designed for that. So not a specific threat. I tend to look at it more positively, especially because I work in gaming, as a positive opportunity to be as accurate as possible and to also introduce a whole group of young people to concepts in history and places that maybe they've never even thought about that history, and to experience another culture, stories, architecture, ways of interacting, things like that. So not a threat, but an opportunity.
Yeah, and there is just one last question that's really provocative that I want to ask, because I do think that there's a
How provocative?
well, just in terms of I think just in the vein of the fake news and information, the question
Sure.
from David Leach is, it sounds like that players don't necessarily want historically accuracy in these immersive experiences, XR or games. They want representations that reflect their understanding of history, which may or may not be accurate. How do you represent history's complexities and ambiguities in ways that may also challenge these expectations? So kind of having people wanting to have the version of history that reinforces what they already believe. So yeah, I think that's a challenge when you start to think about history in general, but also in the context of these games and stories.
That you're absolutely right. That is, I mean, when I started to think about this, I think if we've learned anything over the last few years, it's that a lie can run around the planet 2 times before the truth gets its shoes on. And how that's going to be set up will be a decision made probably on a corporate level, which also terrifies me. But I think, thinking about it really early on, because the metaverse doesn't really exist yet, but thinking about it early on about content. And I think we have really come to see how content can be twisted in order to serve a specific political end, that we need to start thinking about this now in order to figure it out. And if I had the answer, I would tell you I don't. I really don't. But I know that scholars, philosophers, indigenous people, everyone would want this to work. And I think, having seen the regular internet 1.0, the regular internet get co-opted in so many different ways, because in the early 90s when it was coming out, did anybody see it as it was? Like, when I got my first email address in like 1997 or 6 or something like that, I didn't imagine YouTube or anything like that. So, or if you look at, go play Goldeneye. When I was in college, that was killer. That was top of the line. And now the graphics aren't great at all. And I think that now we have the perspective, because we've seen how the internet turned out the way that it did, and it's not necessarily all bad, but there are ways that it could be better. And I think having these conversations early on is a way to sort of do the Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, to think about what we're doing while we're doing it and what it means.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that additional question, and or the additional answer to that question. Very fascinating, and thanks again. And we're going to be moving on to the next section. But before we do our next thing, right before we have one session of talking about some yoga exercises, I think for people, which I'm very curious to hear. But also we have there's a couple of contests, I guess, that are happening that I want to just point people to. I think if you go actually into the chat up in the right hand corner, and then there's the stage, there's a pinned tweet or a pinned chat that starts to talk about the Snapchat filter that is a part of the competition. So you'll find it in the box there, and you can use a Snap filter and follow the rules of posting, and you'll be entered to win either an Oculus Quest 2 or Snap Spectacles 3, which is really cool. So find out more information for that Snapchat filter and follow the rules, and you'll be entered into that contest. And the second contest is one that you've already been entered into just by simply attending the conference today. And by attending, you're entered in to win an XR Creator Package that's valued at $4,000. It includes an iPad, Dell laptop, Oculus Quest 2, and many other goodies that are set up that will hopefully set you up for success in the spatial technologies world. So actually, just as it's important to nourish your body, it's just important, just as it's important to nourish your mind, we're going to be doing some exercises to nourish your body. Right now, we have Diane and Kaylee from Be Fit for Life at Lethbridge College to take us through like a 15-minute yoga session. And then after that, we're going to be—
Hi there, my name is
lunch break.
Diane, and I work in the Be Fit for Life Centre here at Lethbridge College. And I get to spend the next 15 minutes with you doing some stretching activities. These are great for gamers. That's kind of how we've set this up today. But for anybody who is working at their computer all day, which I think is a lot of the population these days, these stretches will help you feel better. They'll reduce pain. They'll improve your health, allow you to focus better. Lots of great benefits for you. So we're going to get started. The first one we're going to do is just from your chair. So you don't even have to get up yet. We're going to do some wrist exercises. So grabbing onto those fingertips. Hope you'll join with me while I do these. Stretching those fingers back. You can do this with a bent elbow or straight elbow, depending on what the flexibility in your wrist and your forearm is like. But you'll probably find whichever hand you use your mouse on is going to be quite tight when you try to do this. So we've got these muscles in contraction a lot of the day. And then we're going to switch and we'll move that over to the other side. So most of the stretches, if you try to hold them for 20 to 30 seconds, that's a great target. But honestly, anything is better than nothing. So just try to take those breaks throughout your day. Recommendations are about every hour. Try to get up, move around, stretch, stand. And then if you have to resume sitting, then hopefully your body's going to be in a better place to do that in a more healthy position. We're going to flip that hand over now so our palm starts facing the floor. Again, giving a little over pressure, stretching that opposite side of the forearm. That should feel good. When you're stretching, it shouldn't be painful. It should just be a stretch. If it is painful, you want to back off a little bit. It's not going to do you a lot of good. If you're hurting the muscles, they're going to fight you a lot. You're not going to get a lot of benefit out of that. So just looking for that good stretch feeling. Every hour, I know that's tricky, but you can do that. Okay, the next one we're going to do is just taking those fingertips, spreading the hands wide first, and then placing them against each other. And we're going to press those hands together. And that should give you a good stretch through all of your fingers, right through the palm of your hand. And you're just going to give it a nice hold. Make sure you're breathing. You're not holding your breath. Really good stretch throughout that whole hand and all 5 fingers. Good. Next one we're going to do is take those thumbs, put them inside your fist. You're going to sort of tip those hands now down towards the floor and then just head into some nice wrist circles. So both hands are going. You can go both directions. And that's going to feel good all around those forearms, wrists, and then into the thumb as well. Nice stretch to finish off there. Okay, next one we're going to do, this is a yoga stretch, and it's called eagle arm. So we're going to take one arm, cross it over the other. Depending on your shoulder flexibility, you might get those hands to meet, but you might not. So just stretch as far as you're able and try to pull those shoulders down and away from your ears. And if you can give those arms a little bit of a lift up. Should give you a really nice stretch through your shoulders and your upper back. And again, make sure you're breathing when you do this. You're not holding your breath. And we're going to release, and we're going to switch arms. So now crossing them the other direction as far as your flexibility allows. And again, shoulders are down away from the ears, and then kind of lift those arms up. Getting that nice stretch for the shoulders and upper back. Good. Okay. Another yoga stretch we can do from a seated position or with our desk. We'll try it from a seated position first. It's called a cat and cow. So just place your hands on your knees. And the first thing we're going to do is round our back, drop our head, kind of like a cat stretch. Take a nice deep breath in. And then as you exhale, we're just going to lift the chest, arching that back. That's called the cow. So alternately, you can do this standing at your desk so that your cat stretch would allow you to round the back, and then the cow would be the opposite. And if you just repeat those ones a few times, that feels really good again through the shoulders, the upper back, and the chest. All right, and we're going to stay standing for a minute here. We're going to take those hands, we're going to take them right up overhead. You can interlock them or just reach them, that's up to you. And from here, we're just going to take a nice reach side to side. Stretching down the side of the body, alternating one side to the other. Really helps to lengthen that spine out after sitting for an extended period. We'll bring those arms down and then reaching behind the back. And if you can, interlock those fingers or interlace them. Nice and tall, shoulders down, really pressing those hands away from your body. Again, gets a nice stretch for your chest, your shoulders, and up into the neck as well. If you want to move the head around a little bit while you're in this position, that's a great idea. Extends the stretch up your neck a little bit more. Good. Now the next one we're going to do is called a figure 8 stretch. So to begin with, you're just going to be crossing those arms across your chest, and it doesn't matter which way you go. And then we're going to be drawing a figure 8 with our body. So if you imagine that figure 8 sort of in this direction in front of your body, that's what we're going to do. So arms across the chest, and you're going to just move your body through that figure 8 motion. So you're bending at the waist. You've got some twists, you've got some turns. Okay, after you've gone one direction, you're going to reverse and see if you can figure out how to go the other direction. This makes your brain muscle connection work a little bit too, coordination-wise. But that stretches all kinds of things through your back. So a nice figure 8. There we go. Okay, still standing. We're going to stretch our hip flexors. Obviously, when you're seated all day long, this area gets contracted and super tight. So we're going to try to give a stretch through that hip flexor section. So you're going to take a step, one foot in front of the other. And then you're going to kind of bring those hips forward a little bit. That's going to give you a little bit of stretch in that back leg. I'm actually just going to switch my legs so you can see a little bit better here. So long stance, roll those hips forward so you can get a stretch right in the front of that hip. Just leaning forward a little bit. If you want, you can take the arm from that same side as the back leg and reach it up for a little extra stretch. Getting that all the way up the body. Okay, and then of course we got to switch and do the other side. Longer step. hips forward, rolling that hip forward, getting that stretch through your hip flexor, and stretching the arm up overhead. Good. And I'm going to move you to, again, another leg stretch. So connected to those hip flexors, we've got our quads right here. So you might want to use your desk or your chair for some balance, grabbing a hold of the foot or the pant leg or your shoe, whatever your flexibility allows. And bringing those legs in line, knees pointing towards the floor. It does feel good. Yeah. All the stretching feels good. The self-hug feels good. All right, switching to that other side. It's pretty common, whether it's legs or upper body, that one side is tighter than the other. It's just the way we tend to live. So don't worry about it, but be aware of it, and maybe make sure you're getting those stretches on the tighter side in particular. Good. All right, so we're going to sit back down for our last few stretches. Now, there is a PDF of several of these stretches included in the content page on the event. So if you wanted to download that or have a look to help remind you of some of these stretches that you can do, please go ahead and do that. I'm doing a few more right now, then we'll be on that page, but that's a great place to start. So the next one we're going to do from a sitting position here is just a forward bend. So back away from your table, back away from your desk, and you're just going to let your body hang forward. It's going to release the lower back a little bit. Take some nice deep breaths in and out while you're down there. Good. And then roll yourself back up. And we are now going to try to cross one foot up over the knee. So we're going to get some hip stretches in here. So once that foot's crossed over, try to sit up nice and tall. You should feel a good stretch right through your glutes or your hip area. Again, an area that just gets really tight on us when we're sitting a lot. So it feels really good to release that. And let's switch to the other side. Again, you're probably really will find one of these sides is tighter than the other one. That's okay. Just work both sides, work with what you've got. Good, I can see they've put a link to the stretch PDF in your chat there if you're interested in seeing that. Good, that's one of my favorite stretches. That always feels really good. Okay, we're going to finish off with some neck stretches. Big area of tension, right? When you're working seated all day long and have got your hands maybe not in the best position typing or using your mouse. We're going to just make sure we're sitting up properly. So your stretches are way more effective if you use good posture to begin with. So sitting up nice and tall, we're just going to take one ear to the shoulder so we can stretch your the side of your neck here down into the top of your shoulder. And again, just don't pull too hard. Like you can add a hand if you want a little more pull, but make sure you're not pulling so hard that you end up with a kink after you're done stretching. Switching to the other side. Good. And then we're just going to roll the head around the front from one shoulder to the other a few times here. Just nice and slow and easy. If you find a spot that's really tight and you just want to hang out there for a little bit and really feel a good stretch, it's a great idea. All right, and then bringing that head back up, we're going to do a rotation stretch as well. So you're just looking over your shoulder one direction. And other direction. Give yourself that time and those muscles time to relax into those positions a bit before you move. Good, and we'll finish with the other side. Good stuff. So, as I said, fitting some movement, some activity into your day when you're spending several hours sitting is going to benefit you in a lot of ways. It's going to reduce disease risks. It's going to make you more comfortable in when you are working, so that you can probably be more productive. You can maybe be more creative, maybe be more inspired. Moving around obviously improves your circulation, so you're going to get more oxygen to your brain as well as your muscles. So there's lots of great benefits. Plus, it just feels good to break up that sitting posture. And if you don't have time to do a whole bunch of stretches, just stand up, one simple stretch up to the ceiling, walk around your chair 3 times, sit back down. It's going to be better than nothing. And hopefully you will feel some great benefits to your body and maybe even your gaming if that's what you're into. So we hope you enjoy the rest of your day here at this conference. Thank you very much for spending 15 minutes of stretching time with me. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really great to be able to get some of those stretches in. And there's also the PDF if you want more information it's in the tabs there that you can find in the content here on the Classy platform. And we're actually going to be taking a break here for lunch. We're going to be coming back in about an hour and 20 minutes or so. And we're going to be meeting up in AltSpace. So if you do have AltSpace, there's going to be a code that we're going to be sharing that you can use to be able to get into the space that we're going to be having a panel discussion. Or you can stay right here, and a lot of this stuff will be broadcast over Classy so that you can watch the stream of it. But if you want to be immersed into VR, then feel free to go over into AltSpace when we come back from lunch. Also, over the lunch break, make sure that you can share on social media using the official Next Snapchat filter. And when you do that, you'll be entered in to win some great prizes. So the thing that I mentioned earlier about Snapchat, if you go ahead and check that out over the lunch break, then feel free to do that. The full rules are pinned in the chat box to get more context and information. And yeah, I guess with that, we'll take a break here for about 80 minutes, and we'll be coming back at I guess 1 p.m. Mountain and noon on Pacific time. So an hour and 20 minutes from now or so. So with that, I'll send you off to your lunches, and we'll see you all here in a bit. And welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everybody's back from the metaverse and AltSpace. I think I may still have a little bit of my VR face on here. And but yeah, I'm really excited for this next talk from Antonia Forster. She's going to be talking about how to build a metaverse, which is going to be really exciting with her background and Unity technologies. So Antonia is a senior XR specialist at Unity with a decade experience in public speaking and several years of experience in software engineering. And at her role at Unity, she works across industries from automotive to construction, helping organizations understand what the metaverse is and how it will impact their workflow. And so she's also a TEDx speaker, a mentor, LGBTQ activist, and passionate advocate for women and marginalized people in technology. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Antonia, to help enlighten us onto how to build the metaverse.
Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate that. So hi, everyone. My name is Antonia Forster. I'm the Senior XR Technical Specialist at Unity, and my pronouns are she, her. Now, XR is kind of a contentious term, but you can imagine that it stands for extended reality, and it's just an umbrella term that covers VR, AR, as well as the space in between. Now, the metaverse, as we've seen with other talks today, is a huge topic. So today, I really want to provide a high-level overview of some of the tools in the toolbox, as well as some levity and some humor. To be honest, quite often when I hear about the metaverse, it's from billionaires in suits who present it as this kind of futuristic concept. That's particularly true in industry. I have much more of a focus on industrial applications. Sometimes it's presented in kind of a dry and soulless way. Despite looking serious, the underlying content can actually be kind of silly or unhelpful. Because while talking about vision and strategy is completely valid, if you don't specify what you actually mean by metaverse, or you only show content that's wildly unrealistic without clarifying that, then the audience might be misled or not receive any clear information on what's possible now or how they can get started. So today I wanted to do the opposite. I've got a talk that looks a little bit silly in style, but is quite serious in terms of content. And by the end of the talk, I hope you'll leave with a clearer understanding of some of the fundamentals around the metaverse. So who am I to tell you about this subject? Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I do have some relevant experience. In my role at Unity, I spend all day pushing the boundaries of immersive technology. Now, while I do work at Unity, I am very much here today with my individual Antonia hat on rather than my Unity hat on. So actually, I'm not going to be talking about software solutions today at all, even though Unity obviously offers an enormous range of them. And that's partly because I couldn't help going into enormous detail and I couldn't possibly do that in the time I've got. But you can always follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn or ping me if you're interested in hearing more about that. And I'll give you those links at the end of the talk. Anything I say today, by the way, are my thoughts and not Unity's. I'm completely self-taught. I don't have a computer science degree. I never went to a code boot camp. I just learned with YouTube. So I'm very passionate about helping other people, particularly women and queer people from non-traditional backgrounds, start their careers in tech. I do lots of work along those lines. So for that reason, I've been shortlisted for a few awards. And last year, I created the world's first LGBTQ+ virtual reality museum to platform underrepresented queer personal history. I also have some very nerdy hobbies like live action roleplay and cyberpunk themed mixed reality games, and they all revolve around blending the real and the fictional world. So in that sense, through both my work, my activism, and my hobbies, the metaverse really lies at the intersection of what I'm about. So hopefully this is what we'll learn today. First of all, let's distinguish fact from fiction. Why is there so much disagreement about what the metaverse is? Secondly, if it doesn't actually exist yet, how can we define it? Maybe it does exist, like many things, along a spectrum. I consulted with a few experts and a lot of developers on Twitter, and I identified some of the traits or features that it might have. And finally, how can you build it? Since the tech evolves faster than I can write this talk, I'm just going to present a small subset of essential hardware, and in particular, ask the question, how can you choose the right tool for you? What's available, and how can you use that to make an impactful experience? So first of all, what even is the metaverse? Well, that very much depends on who you ask. There's a lot of confusion in both the public sphere and in many industries outside of tech around what the term actually means. And that's not surprising at all, because everyone uses the word differently. This table, I think, sums it up well. Many different and distinct technologies, hardware, software, and infrastructure is conflated under this one giant umbrella term, as well as plenty of things that aren't necessarily relevant. Now, this is actually a huge problem for two reasons. First of all, jargon, even when it's used properly, is exclusionary. It disproportionately affects marginalized people who are already made to feel as if they don't belong. But in tech and in programming, just like in scientific research or medicine, sometimes we need technical terms because we have to be specific about what we're talking about, because errors can be costly. So jargon can be useful if it disambiguates, even among one small group of people. But evidently, in this case, that is not what's happening. If everyone is using the term to mean something different, it increases ambiguity and it's no longer useful. So why does it happen? Partly because if you're describing something that doesn't exist yet, maybe you can't do that by talking about current technology. In that case, maybe metaverse is the best word. But frankly, another reason is hype. If you're a startup looking for funding or a writer that wants a large reach and lots of clicks, then piggybacking on trends and hype makes sense, even if a word is ambiguous or misleading. Now, I don't actually take issue with the word metaverse as long as it's disambiguated. Most writers, to their credit, will dedicate a whole article to explaining it. But I do object to the widespread use of the word without any clear explanation. These are some pictures that my friend Nima Zegami took at CES. On the left, the M word is being used to mean AR or XR, augmented or mixed reality, where you can see the real world with digital content on top. In the middle, the same word is being used to show VR, where you're totally immersed in the virtual world. And then on the right, the same word is being used for another VR experience, but this time instead of being a made-up world, you're in a digital copy of a real physical space, which has been 3D captured, which you could also call a digital twin. If you're confused about which of these is the metaverse, then I don't blame you. Personally, I would say the answer is none of them yet. To make things even more confusing, often when people talk about the metaverse, they'll use images or video of aspirational content rather than demos that exist right now. Things they want to build, visualized with CG. Sometimes these portray things that are misleading because it's beyond what's currently possible. For example, in this video, this is meant to show AR, but AR requires that you view content through a headset or a mobile or some kind of surface to render the digital content on. In the video, none of the audience members are wearing glasses or holding a mobile. So that implies that maybe this is some kind of 3D hologram being viewed from many angles in a gym without extra equipment, which isn't a realistic scenario. In reality, everyone in this video is looking at an empty gym and is acting. In contrast, some of these, I think my GIF is not playing, so I'm going to just quickly switch over to a screen share because I have a lot of moving images in this talk. So hopefully this works out. Let me know if you cannot see. There we go. Just to add to the confusion, some CGI portrayals of the metaverse are framed to seem futuristic, but actually they're not that ambitious and they can be built, or some part of them could be built today with current technology. For example, using hand tracking or gestures to select clothing for your virtual avatar, then putting on a VR headset and being that avatar in a multiplayer space is absolutely something that you can build today. So this blending of fact and fiction sends a confusing message because it isn't clear which parts of these videos are already possible, which might be possible soon, and which are just symbolic or maybe ambitious long-term goals. Also, when most people, pardon me, when most people hear the word metaverse, they think of fiction, which makes sense because that's where the term comes from. Shows or films or books like Snow Crash, The Matrix, Ready Player One, Minority Report, even Black Mirror, are most people's main source of exposure to the ideas and content that are something like the metaverse. But despite the stories being fictional, a lot of the technology or experiences are quite realistic and could be built today, such as these two examples. Although, given that a lot of them are dystopian worlds, maybe the question is whether you'd actually want to. Given that so many people define the metaverse differently and that it's not actually real yet, it's not possible to come up with a perfect definition. So maybe we can identify traits or features. I spoke to some experts and the indie tech community on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I came up with these suggestions. Generally, most people I spoke to agreed that the more features like this that an experience has, the more metaversy it can be said to be, or the more it aligns with people's vision of what the metaverse will be like. For example, multi-user. An experience with one user or two doesn't really match with what most people envision when they use the word metaverse. Instead, something huge like an MMORPG or a multi-user dungeon is a closer fit, even though those experiences have existed for a long time. Ownership, the ability to buy or trade avatars or assets using real or digital currency. That seems to be a key feature for many people. Avatars themselves are another feature. If you're just a voice or you're not represented in any way, again, it doesn't match most people's idea of the metaverse. Multi-purpose, particularly when businesses talk about the metaverse. It's framed as a tool that we could use for work or a series of interconnected spaces with different kinds of experiences. But even within one purely social space, the ability to do lots of different things, like shop for real items or play games, watch a movie, have a dance party, I think is more metaversy than a narrow experience like a game in which you just play table tennis. User-generated content. This is my favorite and I think really important. I think of the metaverse as a bit like the internet, and a key feature of that is that it isn't created by one central authority. Anyone can contribute and create anything they want. So how is the metaverse different to the internet? That is a contentious question, but I think a lot of people believe that the answer is that it will have a spatial element. Whether that's a completely virtual world or augmenting the real one with virtual content, XR gives spatial interaction and 6 degrees of freedom. You can look and move anywhere, rather than just seeing content through a portal or window on a 2D monitor. Also immersive. You can also think of this as multimodal input, the ability to use your voice, hands, eyes, even your brainwaves to control things, rather than being limited to a mouse and keyboard or a touchscreen, is potentially a factor. This obviously crosses over because VR isn't possible without head tracking, but for my purposes today, I've split them like this. Also persistent, the idea that you can make changes to the world, you can leave and come back, and they'll still be there. I wouldn't call any experiences that exist right now the metaverse, because again, like the internet, I think people envision the metaverse as an interconnected series of many experiences and worlds. And ideally, that will be multi-platform. You can swap seamlessly from AR to VR to your laptop to your mobile. So what's the thing that connects these experiences and makes them one singular entity? That would be interoperability. If you could buy an avatar in one game, then use that in any other digital experience made by any other publisher, or you had an inventory or currency that persists across all platforms, I think that is quite close to people's imagining of the metaverse. Here are some other traits that I've seen people identify, but these were a bit more fiercely debated. Multi-vendor. Well, the metaverse, as it originated in the novel Snow Crash, was actually produced by a single vendor. And obviously, organizations are vying for ownership and mindshare for the public to associate the metaverse, or whatever we end up calling it, with just one organization. But many people do think it will be a multi-vendor experience, certainly in terms of hardware at least. That's why I'm glad to focus on the tools that enable people to build it, no matter the platform. I mentioned digital twins earlier. For most people, especially in enterprise, the idea of having a digital copy of a real thing, whether that's their product or a building or a machine, is a key aspect. It's certainly very useful. Similarly, for many people, the ability to anchor content to the real world is key. Now, interactive is pretty much agreed upon, but it's also very obvious, so I put it here. And presence, again, is generally agreed upon, but is very hard to define, and it's kind of covered already by immersion. And finally, seamless. It feels more like the metaverse to walk through portals or to throw content from one device to another, rather than some kind of laborious process to move yourself or your assets across platforms. So now that we have these traits, we can use them as criteria. We can look at any digital experience and see, would it count as being part of the metaverse? For example, is Neopets the metaverse? Well, sort of. It's multi-user, and it does allow users to trade using virtual currency, but it's not very metaverse-y because it only contains a few of these traits. You don't have an avatar, although your pets do, and you probably wouldn't use it for work or to attend a music event. What about Animal Crossing? How closely does that match what we might experience in the metaverse? Again, it is multi-user, and you can buy or trade items. You do have an avatar. Users build a house or island, so it's certainly user-generated and persistent, which is really the key feature. Is it multi-purpose? Well, that's debatable. During the pandemic, I did use the game to have social events, picnics with my friends, and to prototype the design of my living room. And in terms of retail, while you can't buy real items inside the virtual store, there is a brand presence by real organizations. For example, Hellmann's Mayonnaise and KFC have official islands. And on the KFC one, you can meet the Colonel and get a discount code for a real KFC bucket. So does that count? I guess it depends how you define it. As I said, I don't think the metaverse exists yet, but I do think VR chat or Neosphere are probably the closest thing to what people are describing currently. They are multi-user. You have a wide choice of avatars. There are user-generated worlds and avatars which can be created using Unity. It's spatial, it's immersive. You can have full body tracking. In fact, during the pandemic, I learned to do the Charleston using a dance class in VR chat because of full body tracking. It's persistent and it's multi-platform. But is there ownership? Well, that one's hazy. There are virtual markets in VR chat. You can browse assets and avatars and purchase them with real money. But they're essentially a URL, and the purchasing is done outside of the game. There isn't a system of in-game currency yet. What it lacks is full interoperability with other experiences. You can create an avatar that can be used in VR chat, as well as, for example, an AR application. But it's very challenging to do. Interoperability is probably the biggest technical challenge in building the metaverse. It's going to require wide multi-organizational collaboration, and I don't think anyone has managed to solve that yet. Now, the metaverse isn't any one of these experiences, but we can use those traits as a scale to measure how closely they approximate what it might feel or look or be like when it exists. It's more a conceptual idea like the internet of interconnected experiences. Personally, I like this attempt at defining it by Tony Parisi. And you can see how this ties into some of the traits from earlier, like platform independence and being user-generated. Neopets is not the internet, but it is part of it. VR chat isn't the metaverse, but it's probably representative of what part of it will feel like. So if those are the features and tools that people identify as being like the metaverse, how do you build them? And importantly, when you have access to so many tools, how do you choose the right one? Broadly, I would say that the tools available fall into 3 types. First, think about the target platform or the output device. How are your users going to experience the content? This should be driven by who your user is and which devices they have access to. Then consider user data capture or your input devices. In other words, will the content respond to the user and how? What kind of data do you need and which devices will capture that? 2 big considerations here are what will actually add to your experience and add to accessibility. Multimodal input will almost certainly make your experience more accessible. Again, start with your audience in mind. And finally, what tools can you use for environmental data capture? I'm not talking about live environmental capture, which is necessary for AR, but more the tools that you could use to make a virtual copy of a real object or environment when you're developing the digital world. First of all, choose your target platform. Well, since there's no official definition of the metaverse, there's no rule that says it has to be experienced on a headset. And in fact, I think that's a rather exclusionary point of view. If you want lots of people to see your content at the same time, like at a trade show, maybe a monitor or a digital display is actually a better fit. You can add interactive elements to normal monitors. Things like hand tracking to enable touchless displays, like on the left, which is a demo I built actually. You can add spatial sound or haptic elements, things that you can feel. You can use normal 2D monitors, or there are many kinds of 3D displays, including holographic ones like the Looking Glass, which give 3D visuals. I say 3D in quotes because you can't walk 360 degrees around the object and still see it. You'd obviously have to rotate the display. VR is a popular option, but it's not a necessity. It will allow you to create a 6 degree of freedom, really vibrant and immersive world. That could be a multi-user social space. It could just be a blank room where someone can design and prototype products. This is VR Rosie, who is a VR artist that uses Tilt Brush to draw and create live artwork. When choosing between tethered PC VR or a standalone headset, think about your requirements. Tethered VR allows higher fidelity graphics, fancier effects, better tracking, and more features. But it requires you or the user to have a powerful PC, and it limits your ability to physically roam and move long distances. Standalone options are often more accessible and slightly cheaper. In VR, whether it's standalone or PC VR, you have no environmental awareness apart from your safety boundary. So it's not a great fit for industrial apps that are used in a dangerous environment or anything outdoors. You can't use a VR headset outdoors because if sunlight goes through the lenses, it gets magnified and burns the screen. So VR headsets are very popular right now in industry for things like remote job site induction and for health and safety training. In other scenarios, AR is the right tool, whether it's on a headset or a mobile device like a phone or tablet. Since smartphones are so widely available, mobile AR is a great choice for gaming like Pokemon Go or retail like the IKEA Place app. AR headsets are more popular in industry at the moment though, largely because it's safer to be aware of your environment rather than looking at a screen, and also to have your hands free. AR headsets like the HoloLens are very popular in engineering and in construction. You can visualize a building that's midway through construction on top of its site, or you can bring up instructions when you're fixing a piece of machinery. Content on AR headsets will almost always appear semi-transparent, and sometimes they have a fairly restrictive field of view. So VR is a more popular choice for immersive and vibrant content. For a long time, AR headsets were only for enterprise because they were so expensive. But now there are Snap spectacles and other consumer options too. Finally, I want to mention the option of XR, the space between AR and VR. Right now, it's not very common for headsets to offer this, but you can implement AR on a VR headset using pass-through. That means the cameras on the headset film the world around you and show it on the screen so you can see your surroundings. And then, just like a mobile phone, you can render digital content on top. This means it's possible to make an app that starts as AR, then becomes increasingly immersive until it's fully VR, or vice versa. This is a demo of that developed at Unity, called Unity Slices. The content is anchored to a table, which also gives you haptic and force feedback when you tap buttons on the surface. Now, I want to point out, in this video, there are 3 people using the virtual table, but only 2 of them are in the same room. Those 2 people are using the same physical table, while the third is using their own table in their own house. When we slide into AR, one avatar disappears, so we can see the real person, but the other is still an avatar because they're not physically present, but they still share a common physical space. This personally is, for me, one of the most exciting and metaverse-like demos I've ever seen. That said, while this is a real built demo, it's still sort of a proof of concept for the future, because right now there are hardware limitations. This is implemented on the Quest 2, where the AR view has to be black and white. The Vario XR headset could also be used for something similar. It's likely that moving forward, more and more headsets and XR experiences will offer this kind of flexibility. Oh, gone too far. 1 second. Once you decide how your user will experience sight and sound, another consideration is whether you want to use the sense of touch. This could be as simple as a controller rumbling, or something more complex, like wearable gloves or vests, non-wearables, like an ultrasonic array, which uses constructive interference, or simply lining up content to real objects, like a table, or the user's arm, or a whole apartment. Next, you have to think about which user data or input devices you need. How will your user interact with the world? Grabbing things in VR is intuitive, so hand tracking is useful for that. Or you can add hand tracking to a 2D display to make it touchless, which is hygienic. It also allows limited sign language, which I do see users doing in VR chat, adapted for the position of the camera. Eye tracking allows you to see what the user is focused on, very useful for consumer research or to make content that is adaptive, like implementing visual depth of field, depending on the user's focus. This next example is one of my favorites. It uses hand, head, eye, and mouth tracking. You look at a helicopter to target it, then you stick your tongue out to grab it. Finally, full body tracking. This is very popular in VR chat and Neos VR because of the sense of presence it brings. You can also use biometric sensors to detect nerve activity in the heart or skin, muscles, or brain. And brain-computer interfaces fall under this category. There are many uses for this, including adaptive horror. This is a project called Apex of Fear, which my friend Thomas Takildson is working on. You can make content that is scary, but doesn't actually cause the user distress. And finally, if you want to bring a real object into the digital world, how would you do that? One way is photogrammetry. You can use any camera to take lots of pictures and stitch them together with software into a 3D model. It's slow, but you can get detailed results. LiDAR is much quicker. You can do this with an iPhone or iPad, but it works better on large objects. I'd say larger than a shoe. Finally, volumetric video. This isn't really separate to the others. You can capture this with LiDAR, or you can fake volumetric video by using chroma key, which is essentially a green screen, and adding clever effects. That is a small sample of the tools available to you, but it doesn't mean you should go out and use everything. Start with why. This comes from a TED Talk by Simon Sinek. Don't start by thinking about tools, start with the problem. What are you trying to solve? Who is it for? And why is it needed? Think about how you'll achieve those things. What will that look like? And then how will the tools enable that? Only add the features that serve your why. Otherwise, you may end up building an experience that you feel is futuristic, but doesn't land with your users. This is an example that made an impression on the XR community for the wrong reasons. Walmart created a VR supermarket where you can put wine or milk into your shopping cart. But there was criticism around this experience, essentially saying, we're in VR. We could be literally anywhere. What is the point of being in a supermarket? How does that add anything to my experience? If you don't start with your why, you can invite this kind of criticism. So personally, I think a good why to start with is enabling something that isn't possible in real life, or making something that is possible cheaper, easier, and accessible to more people. Teach a class of kids by going to outer space, or train staff about something dangerous, but in a realistic and safe way, like fire safety or emergency responders. Now, while I urge you to focus on a problem you're trying to solve, It doesn't necessarily have to be a problem that you experience. In fact, I think it's better if it isn't. Those of us that work in tech are a privileged subset of people. Spend time in other communities, especially those who are not well represented in technology. Solve problems that others encounter. But don't just parachute in. That is problematic for a number of reasons. Consult with and hire people from marginalized communities. Give everyone the tools to address problems that they encounter. And bear in mind that this tech is prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. If it's not an appropriate tool for the job, don't force it. These are just some examples of tools being used for positive social impact. These technologies don't just allow us to build virtual worlds. We can also augment and change the real world for the better. Thank you so much. I have so much more to say. I had to kind of rush through the end, but if you want to stay in touch or learn more about any of these subjects, I'm very active on Twitter. I'm somewhat active on LinkedIn. If you'd like to find out more about my recent project, which is building the world's first LGBTQ+ VR museum, it has its own website here. And if you want to stay in touch with me, just Google me, add me on any platform you want. I've got some time for questions now, but if you don't feel confident asking your questions in this forum or we don't get time, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Antonia. That was a lot of really great slides in there. In fact, I was like copying some of them and adding things to my presentation as I was like seeing different stuff. But we do actually have a couple of questions that we have time for. Both of them are kind of related to a similar thing. As I was looking through, you had things about user-generated content and ownership. And so in that context, let me actually read these questions. So from Ludovic David, he says, ownership seems to be trying to mimic reality, but virtual scarcity is bad as it's fake. How can we imagine a better economy to get rid of it? We can do better than the real world here instead of just copying its defects. And so just curious if you have any thoughts offhand in terms of speculative real estate and ways of replicating virtual buying and owning of land. There's equivalents to attention. So how do you make sense of some of these things in terms of scarcity on the virtual context?
Yeah, it's a great and difficult and complex question. You'll notice I didn't go into sort of blockchain or digital scarcity or ownership and ledgers and kind of proof of ownership for a number of reasons. That being that, yeah, there's some controversy in that area. There was a meme I wanted to include, which was someone saying, it's the metaverse, we can build whatever we want. And someone saying, great, what have you implemented? And they're like, landlording. So yeah, it's interesting that we mimic the structures and the systems we see in real life. And we don't have to do that. We also see that with physical spaces. People build, you know, the Walmart example is a great one, the supermarket that we're familiar with, instead of just thinking, does this really add to our experience? Yeah, in terms of, I mean, I don't have an economic model to replace the one that we know. I'm certainly not an economist in that sense. But I think some of the most interesting points about this that I've seen come from Philip Schofield. I hope I get his name right. I am the worst with names. Who the founder of Second Life. I'm absolutely going to get his name wrong. I'm going to Rosedale, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I couldn't remember his name. I literally spoke with him recently and he's probably going to watch this and I'll be really embarrassed. Yeah, so Philip Rosedale actually came up with this very interesting and very simple economic simulator, which is just to do with spheres interacting, and each interaction is a transaction. And what it showed is that if you have free-flowing resources in a virtual world, then it will result in an inequity, because the more resources someone has, the less they have to lose with every transaction. So he looked at different ways of combating that in the context of Second Life. And I think his blog posts are some of the most interesting I've read on it. One of the conclusions he came to is that a sort of taxation per transaction that contributes to a universal basic income, in the sense of how you think about it in the real world, was one of the solutions. But then one of the problems there is, if you do that, how do you identify that it's not one person with multiple wallets, that it's instead, you know, per user? Then that gets into GDPR and biometric data and identifying people, which is another kind of thorny area. So it's a difficult question, but yeah, I think Philip Rosedale has some really great content on that.
Yeah, I have an unpublished interview recently of him talking a lot those issues of economics. So rather, there's another economics question, but I'm going to actually go down to Heather Dodds, who has a different question. And her, just to start with her comment, she says that she really loved her presentation and that there haven't been enough women putting in questions out through the course of the day. So I'm happy to highlight Heather's question, where she says, at the beginning, you recommended an approach of using tools and putting the concept of translating reality to virtual reality at last. Isn't it possible to put that step first in design and then from there answer concerns about accessibility?
Yes, actually, yes. So even though I presented the point last, it's because it's the point I wanted people to remember. Starting with why is what you should do first. So in retrospect, I might reorder this this presentation. But yes, I definitely agree. I think you need to start with the purpose. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Who is it for? And I think accessibility isn't something that you should be adding at the end after you've designed. It should be built in from the ground up. And that includes consulting with people with different access needs, because it's not always obvious what are the biggest problems if it's not someone, it's not something you have personal experience with. So I think consulting and integrating with that community, hiring people from marginalized communities or people with different access needs is absolutely essential. Just understanding how different people access the content. So I used to work in a planetarium, and that was how I got started in VR. And what I actually learned is that for some visually impaired users, they couldn't stargaze in real life. They couldn't stargaze in planetarium, but they could in VR. And it was the only way they could see the stars. And just understanding someone's actual sensory experience with different devices is a fundamental step. So you can't just add on accessibility at the end. It's more than just subtitling, for example.
Okay. Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. So I'm actually going to go to that other question. Because you mentioned user-generated content, and Dave Kamalski has a question saying, how important is a functioning marketplace and content protection when it comes to user-generated content and content ownership in the metaverse?
That's a great question. I'm not sure where to go with that question. I mean, I think it's the same as real life. If people are generating content, it depends on, I suppose, what the content is. But this is something we see with, NFTs at the moment. There's a lot of artwork being minted that doesn't belong to the person minting it. I think there's probably less. If there's no way of translating digital currency to real currency, then having not had it happen to me, I hesitate to say that it's less impactful, but it's likely to have less real world severe impact. So I think part of that depends on whether you're monetizing that content for virtual currency, for cryptocurrency, or for kind of managed currency, like for actual real world currency, and what the asset is. But yeah, I think if we do implement marketplaces, and particularly if we try and use interoperability to solve for this, then I think we need to think very carefully about licensing and copyright and how we protect creators, which is an area that isn't explored potentially enough.
Yeah, I'd say there's a dialectic between putting stuff out for free and having lots of people see it versus getting financially compensated. And sometimes those aren't really always on the same page in terms of lots of people seeing it, but not getting paid. And so I am seeing different creators like or Rec Room being able to compensate creators, but Roblox is an example where they have it. But yeah, there's a lot of issues with exploitation of labor that happens in the metaverse that is not really getting things off to a great start. But there's maybe new models that we can figure out. But
Right.
that's a good maybe place to stop for now. Thanks again, Antonia, for coming by and giving all your great thoughts there. And I think now we're actually going to be moving on to a little bit of a brain teaser with a brain smoothie, or maybe we're going back to the same folks that we had before with Diane and Kaylee from Be Fit for Life at Lethbridge College. They're going to take us through some revitalizing our afternoon with an uplifting smoothie and movement to keep focused, hydrated, and nourished. So take it away, ladies.
Hello, and welcome back to the Be Fit for Life Center. My name is Kaylee, and with me is Pedro. Today, we're going to be teaching you and showing you some of our favorite recipes for how to make a brain-boosting smoothie, which you can access in our content section in the website. So today, we're going to start off with our hydration. And with hydration, you could choose from water, milk alternative, such as oat milk, or almond milk, a milk product, or coconut water. So a coconut water is a natural source of electrolytes, which will allow you to keep yourself hydrated and fueled throughout the day. So we're going to add first our water. Next, we're going to look at vegetables. So when it comes to smoothies, you could add spinach, kale, cooked beets, carrots, and in today's smoothie, we're just going to add our spinach here. So this is for our nutrients. Now, in order to make this taste good, we want to make sure that we are adding stuff that will fuel us and keep us fuller, but then we will get to some better taste later. So stay with us to see what we've got in store for you. Starting with our healthy fat options, we've got a natural peanut butter and a nut butter option. We also can put in some flaxseed oil, which is great for omega-3s, and an MCT oil, which is our medium chain triglycerides derived from coconut oil. And this will all keep us fuller for longer. And today we're going to choose the avocado to put in our smoothie. Make sure we get all of those nutrients. So our fats are also for helping our brain stay fueled throughout the day. And I'll turn it over to Pedro here to continue with our antioxidants.
All right, coming up now we have the antioxidants, which we have frozen blueberries here, we have spirulina, and we have the famous cocoa. Those are good for overall health, to reduce the many risks of diseases, and they reduce cell damage, which makes you look youthful and looking good. So which one were you using?
We're going to take the blueberries.
The blueberries.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
Thank you. Awesome. Using the frozen kind too will also add some flavor dimension. And then you may not have to add ice at the end.
Yeah, it's good for some texture, that's for sure. Well, now we get the protein sources. This is the good old Greek yogurt. Always pick the Greek yogurt because it has more protein than the average yogurt. Always go for the plain one instead of the flavored because they add sugar to those. So this one's just pure protein. Here we have whey protein isolate, which is based from milk. So that's a good source of protein, a complete source of protein. If you want to go vegan, there's this one that is based with pea and rice protein, which are also a good source. And that's the one we're
going to choose this one.
This one today.
Also add some flavors, so that's great. Making sure that we have a nice variety that also pairs well together in our smoothie. Just one scoop, really easy. So it's a really great way to make a quick meal that you could have for breakfast, as a snack, at any time during the day. And we'll continue.
This is also a sweetener, so it has stevia extract, so it's going to give a little bit of sweetness to our smoothie. So, and next coming up, we have fiber, which is very important to lower cholesterol, keep you full for longer, and a bunch of other benefits. And those are actually very good ones. They have like protein, good fats, and you can always go with the good old oats. Great source of fiber and protein as well. And which one?
I don't know. Let's pick the flax one there.
All right.
Perfect. So we're going to add a tablespoon here of our flax seeds. Great. Nice heaping, healthy tablespoon, since we'll probably all share this later. And then lastly, we want to focus on making this actually taste good. So you could add your favorite fruits here. So we like to go with the banana. Some of us in the office, that's a staple for us. We also have frozen mango and coconut. So in today's smoothie, I think we're going to add the frozen food. And you could also talk about monk fruit.
This is this is a good alternative if you're not using a sweetened protein powder. For example, you're just using the Greek yogurt. So you can sweeten your smoothie with just a natural source like monk fruit, which is a great one. 0 calories, just natural things. So that's a good one.
Thank you. And so, yeah, we've sampled a ton of ingredients that we like to use. However, there's hundreds of things that you could put in your smoothie. And we'd be open to hearing what you choose as your staple, which you could put in the chat for us. And then based on budget too, you could also decide what would be a smart decision for you. So if you're choosing 1 to 2 of each of these products on our smoothie, brain boosting smoothie sheet, it will build that full meal for you to keep you full for long. So I think we're ready to blend. Just checking out to make sure we have enough hydration in here. All right. All right, so it looks interesting, not gonna lie there. However, you could blend for longer to make sure that it's the desired consistency you want, or you could add ice. We will also be trying it live so you can see our reactions and make sure that we'll give you our honest opinion about our brain boosting smoothie.
Sure.
Cheers.
Cheers.
It's a little chunky. Okay. You know what? The taste is good. I would give that a solid 8 out of 10.
Me too.
You could really taste the vanilla in the protein. But yeah, I would blend that more. Okay, so when we are looking at our smoothie, we kind of go off of what a food guide is saying. So half of our plate is fruits or vegetables. As you can see, we put a lot of health into our smoothie. And then a quarter of the plate is protein and a quarter is whole grains. Awesome. So one of our other tips for you is to get yourself a smoothie cup that has a lid and a straw to avoid any spillage when you're working close to your, either you're gaming or you're working and you're sipping on this. Sip slowly, be mindful, enjoy your food, and make sure that you're choosing ingredients that you enjoy, but also don't be shy to sample some different food items.
Exactly. You can go so many ways. This is just a sample, but you can go like with hundreds of ingredients in your smoothie, depending on your preference. So feel free to try them on also.
Yeah, if you've got any questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat, and we're happy to answer them for you. So thanks for coming back to the Be Fit for Life office, and have a great rest of your conference.
I think we have Mike to come on and give some final thoughts, and then I'll share some final thoughts and we'll wrap it up. So Mike, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Awesome. Thanks so much. I won't take too much time. I just wanted to take a few minutes and just thank everybody for attending this conference. And I really appreciated what George said about talking about skills and how it's these new skills, whether it's with 3D or Unity, Unreal Engine, are going to be a critical piece going forward here, which resonates really well with us at Lethbridge College. I just wanted to quickly share a couple of pieces here. Give me one sec. Let's try this here. See if this will work. Can you see my screen?
Now I can, yes.
Okay, awesome. I just want to do one last quick plug for our VR book club that's happening next month. We're bringing Stephanie Riggs to kind of talk about her book, The End of Storytelling. We really believe that we want to continue this conversation going forward past this event. This event, the next conference, has been a great critical mass point to get us all thinking about the future and the technology implications. We want to keep that conversation going, starting with our book club next month. So please, we will be emailing all the attendees, but please make a note to get this book and join us to discuss the topics within that book. We also will be planning some other events. Stay tuned soon, where we can have more presentations, more conversations, more deep dives. It's been a really thought-provoking day from all of our presenters. And again, going back to those skills pieces, super, super important, but we know that everyone's really busy. So we've designed a couple of workshop options for 3D art, for photogrammetry, and for AR development with Snapchat. And again, you'll be getting a coupon code or a discount code within your email that will allow you to register in any of all of these for $99 Canadian each, because we really do believe in the importance of empowering you to become the creators of the metaverse, because that's really going to drive the growth and adoption of this platform and of these technologies as the content that is available. And one last thing I wanted to say, within the S.T.A.R.T Centre at Lethbridge College, we really are looking for opportunities to collaborate, whether it's with community organizations or technology partners. We have a number of both those categories where we work on projects together. And we've got, if you want to take a look at our website to learn more about what we are doing, some of our projects and some of the news pieces around that, feel free to take a look at lethbridgecollege.ca. And on that, there's also a link, but I have the link listed here as well. If you'd like to look at partnering with us, either as a technology partner or as a community organization, feel free to fill out that intake profile and connect with us, because we do see that we are on this cusp with this exciting new computing revolution, and we want to be able to work with you in any way possible. So with that, I'll end here and turn it back over to Kent to do his final wrap up. Again, thanks everybody for attending today.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have some logistical notes here, and we do have the winners. I'll make some announcements there for by first name. If you look in the chat, you may have won one of the books. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining here today. This was a lot of fun. Thanks again to Lethbridge College for hosting this and bringing everybody together. I spent a lot of time on the Voices of VR podcast exploring these topics, and so in some sense, I'm a true believer that this technology is going to have a lot of transformative impact. If you think about Beat Saber as a game, I mean, there was like 3 people in the Czech Republic that created that game, and it completely revolutionized the entire industry and made us imagine what was possible. And just the way that they designed it, it's just it's like the best VR game that's ever been created. And it was really literally like created by 3 people in the Czech Republic. So it's an opportunity for people to really have an idea about what might be possible. And you may actually be the first person to actually think about it, but not only think about it, but actually be able to execute on it, and to be able to then have the network effects of it, changing the entire landscape of the industry. I mean, it's not hyperbole to say that we're still in that phase of it still being so early that there's a lot of opportunities there. So whether it's an application in a specific context or finding the true potential for what this medium can do. It's a lot of what I've been trying to figure out, like this medium and what's its inherent nature, its affordances, and where's it going in the future. My episode 1000, the Voices of VR podcast, is probably a good summary of that, of my just a 3-hour reflection on all the different ranges of potential. But yeah, like I said, there's still open for a lot of innovation, and this is a really great time to be getting into the industry. And so, yeah, I just really look forward to anybody that's here, what you are able to create, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to show me what you've been working on. Yeah, like I said, I think the George Bloom's last thoughts in terms of the relationality, I think, is a big part of. I've also been focusing on moving away from this sort of thinking in terms of things as static, concrete objects, and then thinking about them dynamic processes that are unfolding and that are fundamentally in relationship to each other. If there's anything that we need, is to be in right relationship to each other, but also the right relationship to the world around us. So many variety of different ecological things that are happening that we need to be in right relationship on all dimensions. And then to be in relationship to the world around us, to the physical reality, but also to all the different ideas, and be exposed to many different diversity of perspectives, which I think that VR can really do quite well. So just to kind of logistically, all the different things as we start to wrap up, Taylor had put in some winners of the book for end of storytelling. I'll just read the first names and you can look up and you'll have an email. So Yashna, oops, it just went away. Yashna, Stephen, Chris, Jeff, Christina, Dustin, Dylan, Edward, Emery, and David. You may have some name clashes there. So double check to see if you've won one of those books. And then, yeah, just thanks again for everybody who attended this conference today. It's been a great day of learning from lots of different industry experts and lots of really engaging conversations. And I wanted to also thank the sponsors of this event, RINSA, and Alberta Innovates. Alberta Innovates. They're the reason why this conference happened. So thanks to them. The S.T.A.R.T Centre is an incredible initiative there at Lethbridge College, and I strongly encourage all of you to check it out. We heard a little bit about that earlier today, so you can have more information there. There'll be another contest that will be announced on February 22nd, so look out for your email and keep your fingers crossed for the things that I mentioned earlier. Also, just take a minute to be able to fill out your post survey that's located in the chat, and by doing that, you'll get a free Starbucks gift card. So with that, I think that's all that we have for today. And I just wanted to thank everybody again for joining in. Invite anybody else from Lethbridge College if you have any final thoughts. But if not, I guess I will see everybody in the metaverse.